Hello and welcome to Six Part. Today I'm gonna continue the story What If Deku Had the Power of a Forgotten God Part 2. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a big thumbs up, and to watch more videos like this, subscribe to my channel and turn that bell notification on so you never miss an upload. Now wasting no more time, let's begin.
Izuku slipped his phone into the black and green pants of his tracksuit, making sure he had everything in order 3 times already. Showing the white shirt he was wearing under, he changed the zipper of the matching jacket, just leaving it halfway up. He left his room and headed toward the kitchen, his personalized breathing mask slung loosely from his neck. Early on, he was not shocked to discover his mother reading from her tablet and sipping coffee in her pajamas. He smiled and said, "Good morning, Mom," sitting next her fast, thanking her for the fruit salad, yogurt and sandwich breakfast. "Good morning to you too, dear," she said after sipping her caffeinated excellence. She arched an eyebrow at his composed breakfast eating. "Are you really feeling as calm as you look? Today is the big day after all," she remarked sarcastically. Izuku was worried about the approaching tests if he wasn't grinning like a fool at his phone or sprinting across the neighborhood. She couldn't really criticize him. Less than though still a teenager about to start the first significant step toward fulfilling his dreams, he was as brilliant as her son was. He was quite right to be anxious. "Not at all," Izuku said quickly but coolly. "I feel like I am about to die, but I think I did all the fretting I could have during the week. There is no point on showing how nervous I am at this point. The only thing left to do is go there and try to not disappoint myself and those who support me," he said with conviction, but his feelings were betrayed both by his words and the shaky smile on his face. Inko snorted and reached with her hand to tenderly pinch his cheek. She said almost dismissingly, "And as I have been telling you the entire week, you shouldn't worry. You know you are more than prepared for those exams, especially the practical one. It's obvious you will be using your quirks in some way, and you have been training with all might for the past 10 months. You have this on the bag." She released his cheek with a snap. Then she grinned slyly, not looking at her son rubbing his cheek. "What you should be nervous about is that girl you have been talking to lately. What's her name?" "Momo Yaoyorozu, Izuku was looking like a tomato in less than a second, with that redness of his face. He said nothing and turned away embarrassed. He felt bad about telling his mother about his meeting with the first person he could have thought of as a friend his age. His mother was convinced they loved each other and were covertly dating since they had been in touch routinely over the week, which made him happy knowing that meant she also thought of him as a friend. Though he would be a fool if he denied Momo's great beauty and sensuality, his true appreciation of her was her brain and her sincere will to prove she could be a powerful hero. With a quirk like hers, Izuku didn't doubt she was capable of that and more, something he had made sure she was prone to do on occasion. She didn't doubt anything else. "We are just friends, Mom," he mumbled after finishing his breakfast. His mother shook her head, signaling she would do it, just as he was ready to carry the plates to the sink to wash them personally. Izuku left the dishes on the table, shrugged and nodded at her. "I guess I'll be going. No, I have to leave now if I want to be on time since I'm running there to warm up and loosen off my body." Inko nodded her head and waved her hand to indicate that Izuku should approach her closely. She reached with her arms when he stood before her and planted a kiss on his forehead on his head. He grinned at him and patted his arm. "Good luck, honey. I want you to remember that I am proud of you and I love you with all my heart whatever happens." Izuku grinned down at her. He said, "Thank you, Mom. I love you too," gently hugging her head to his torso. Up until Inko pounced his flank and shooed him out of the house, telling him to hurry. They hugged each other. Laughing, Izuku did as advised. Izuku stepped outside his apartment and closed the door behind him, adjusting his mask such that the lower half of his face was covered and the headphones included into the mask covered his ears. Then he reached into his pocket and retrieved his phone to set it so he might enjoy some music on his way to UA. He only had time to do that before a message appeared on his hand as the phone vibrated. It was, "Good morning, Izuku-kun. Momo-chan. I wish today's luck the best of all. I'll be hoping for you. Tell me how it went when you get back. Call me." Grinning silly, he responded to the message with words of thanks and appreciation. He went to his music app, Spotify Premium FTW. Feeling hip-hop after doing that, then selected a playlist and hit the random bottom. His face started to show an eager smile right away as Beast, Southpaw Remix, Rob Bailey and the Hustle Standard featuring Busta Rhymes, KXNG Crooked and Tech 9 started blasting right into his ear. The influence of the song Izuku decided against using the stairs was thus rather great. Rather, he ran toward the corridor's railing leading to his apartment and jumped over it with his arm to start a free fall from the 5th floor. He channeled armament to his ligaments and muscles at the last second, reaching the ground, bending his knees to lessen the impact of the fall and only leaving minor indents of his feet on the concrete. His form almost blurred as he moved faster than he could have without totally enhancing his legs, which by the way was still far faster than the normal person that lacked body enhancements for quirks. With a smooth motion he pulled the hood of his undershirt over his head and barely paused for a second. So far, so good, he said to himself as he shot across the streets, effortlessly avoiding pedestrians without slowing down with passive mantra. His only hope was that today stayed that way. It was looking to be a quite wonderful day. Izuku arrived to the UA about half an hour. Grounds and he was more than just a bit intrigued at the sight of the massive fences, the imposing door and the very high buildings linked to one another. He understood that the grounds for the most well-known hero school in Japan were large, able to accommodate numerous facilities and training areas spanning kilometers. He understood that what he was seeing was only the surface of things. He turned away the amused and inquisitive looks other teenagers were sending his direction into UA correct as he pressed the button stopping the music coming from the headphones and pulled back his hood and removed his breathing mask. Izuku deduced that he wearing workout clothes was definitely strange to them since all of them were sporting their school uniforms. Izuku shrugged. He didn't give a damn about it. Although wearing your uniform was expected, it was not mandated, and Izuku was intending to run his way here, thus wearing a stuffy uniform was unacceptable. "Fuck off, Deku," snared a familiar but somewhat deeper voice. Turning around, Izuku arched an eyebrow at Katsuki Bakugo approaching him like a criminal with a scowl on his face. Though Katsuki had not changed much, Izuku observed that he was notably taller and more muscular than he had been almost 2 months ago when he visited his school. "Get the fuck out of my way or die." Izuku dully answered, "Considering that you only need to change direction slightly to not bump into me, I find your request pointless." He crossed his arms. Katsuki snarled and appeared to be about to use his quirk on Izuku, but he seemed to think better than he would have in front of UA the day the test is scheduled. So he grumbled, then simply changed his path across Izuku without speaking again. Izuku shook his head disappointedly and watched him go. He isn't going to grow up anytime soon, is he? He questioned himself ristically. A few minutes later he shrugged his head and began to follow the other hopeful applicants toward the building. It was at this point he came upon a very attractive brown-haired girl with 2 long bangs framing her face from shoulder-length hair. Her brown eyes seemed to be curious as she realized she was also strolling next to him. She observed his clothes and Izuku raised an eyebrow in amusement as she put a hand in front of her mouth, clearly trying not to laugh. "No, I did not forget to wear my uniform if that is what you were thinking," he said, idly pointing out the pads at the top of every finger that matched those found on animals. He blushed a little, though, when he noticed her thin, but well-endowed, frame covered in a short skirt, long socks and a jacket. The girl appeared unaware of this as she tried to quell her need to laugh. She said, finally cool-headed, "So sorry. It's just seeing everyone in their uniform and suddenly seeing you wearing those clothes struck as funny for how random it was." Izuku gracefully said, "Of course, that's excluding when scary monsters and villains pop out in movies and such. That's not fun at all." He stopped and hurried to add, Yes. I also find random and sudden things that happen funny." "I agree," chirped the girl with a smile before she turned a curious glance at him, now really looking at Izuku and blushing when she caught sight of his muscular and tall frame along with his kind green eyes and handsome face. So, why are you sporting those clothes?" Feeling a little ashamed about it, he said, "I'm used to running first thing in the morning every day and didn't want to stop doing it even if for one day or not sleep enough to get it done and then come here running from house as a compromise." The girl nodded gently, clearly in grasp. I get it. You didn't want to risk having bad luck by doing one of the things in your daily routine in a daily relevance as important as this one." Izuku blinked at her then laughed and grinned. "You could say that, yes." She chirped once more. Then she made a fist and bumped it into the air in great enthusiasm. "Let's do our best, Deku-kun." Izuku stopped suddenly. She also stopped and turned back at him in perplexity. He looked at her with both eyebrows raised into his hairline. Where did you heard that? The girl blushed a little and shook the back of her head anxiously. Feeling ashamed of her boldness, I kinda overheard what that blonde guy with a mean expression called you when I first noticed you, and you two seemed to know each other, so I assumed that it was your name. Izuku shook his head and snorted in laughter. No, that's just how Katsuki Bakugo, that blonde guy with a mean expression, calls me ever since we were kids. It's another way you can read my actual name, Izuku, and it means worthless. He gave it to me after I failed to develop my quirk at roughly the same time as him. I eventually did develop my quirk a few months after he gave it to me, so ignoring him now is quite easy. The girl seemed ashamed now and rushed on to make things right. The idea of disparaging this teen, even subtly, left a sour taste on her mouth. Oh, I'm so sorry. It didn't even cross my mind that it could be like that. To me, Deku, since it sounds a lot like Dekiru, gives of a feeling of, you can do it, so, hee. She stammered, blushing, and lightly punched her temple as she tilted her head cutely. Izuku blushed as he stared at the girl once more with wide eyes, her words and the general cuteness he was seeing having effect. He started to smile gradually until he was clearly delighted. Well, if that's the case, then I wouldn't mind if you called my Deku, he said, beaming at the girl. My full name is Izuku Midoriya. What is yours? She blushed beautifully at the expression on his face and his words, especially at the way stressed you was when referring to her. She also beamed at him joyfully. And my name is Ochako Uraraka. You can call me Ochako, considering that you are allowing me to call you by a nickname, she said, feeling oddly excited at the idea of being able to refer to him in that way. Then it's a pleasure to meet you, Ochako-chan, he said, reaching for her hand. Ochako took his hand in hers and nodded her head cheeringly. Similarly, Deku-kun. After exchanging numbers to keep in touch in case they didn't see each other during the rest of the day, for the moment since they were being seated by school, Izuku and Ochako headed toward a massive amphitheater and had to part ways. Sadly for him, that meant he would be seated next to Katsuki for an unknown duration. That didn't mean it wasn't frustrating even if he had enough practice to ignore Katsuki to so readily. Sitting next to one another, they were momentarily happy to ignore one another, but Izuku knew it was only a matter of time until Katsuki opened his mouth to say something nasty or insulting him. He sighed tiredly, leaned forward and rested his elbow on the desk in front of him, rested his chin on his palm, stared boredly as the rest of those scheduled for the test entered the room. Izuku perked as he watched a tall, thin man with spiky long hair and a little mustache walk towards the podium when everyone was seated. Around his neck he had a directional speaker device, on top of sunglasses and headphones. He had on a black jacket with a black collar turned upside down stud-wise. He wore black pants with a red studded belt, black boots, black fingerless gloves, and tan, studded shoulder pads. Izuku noted this pro-hero right away. Excitement drove him to say, "That's Present Mike." Along with being one of the teachers at UA, he was a pro-hero with a weekly radio program that Izuku practically religiously listened to. Snarled Katsuki at him, "Shut the fuck up." Izuku looked at him angrily. "Look at me once more, I'll make explode you until you die." Izuku stared at him squarely for a few seconds, then shook his head and turned his attention to Present Mike, who appeared poised to begin speaking. Suddenly yelling, "Welcome one and all to my live show," he caused many of the students present to cover their ears and leap in terror. Izuku merely watched in eagerness. "Everybody say, heek," he said, sharply cupping an ear with a hand and pivoting it toward the audience, a hopeful smile on his face. Silence was his response. The only reason Izuku neglected to reply was his extreme nervousness and excitement would have caused. Present Mike went on without seeming concern for not getting the response he was expecting. He trailed off and struck a dramatic posture, with his hand epically raised above his head. "I've got shoals down my spine, too. Listeners, all right examiners. I'm gonna giving you the lowdown on how this will go down. Are you ready?" Once more, nobody addressed his query. Still, that was something since someone coughed uncomfortably. "Now pay close attention, listeners," he said once more, not bothered about the lack of reply. "We'll be testing your mettle by running a 10-minute practice run at our replica city district. You can take waiters whatever you like, so, everybody gather your designated areas after the presentation, ya dig?" When Katsuki saw he was assigned battle location A while Izuku was assigned battle location B, he clicked his teeth in irritation. Katsuki looked at the several areas that showed on the big screen of amphitheater. Though it was loud enough for Izuku to hear, he whispered, "They don't intend on letting friends or classmates to cooperate with each other, huh? It's probably a set so I don't get to kill you." Izuku waved him off right away. The black-colored silhouette of the Goomba, Koopa Troopa and Piranha Plant enemies from Mario Brothers suddenly changed, and for some reason the numbers 1, 2 and 3 next to a letter P in the center of each one respectively showed around a picture depicting what clearly was the portrayal of the metropolitan environment in which they would be testing. Current Mike started talking once more. He motioned towards the screen with a dramatic and exaggerated flourish, and it now showed the silhouette of Mario killing each of the enemies and his points increasing accordingly with each enemy he killed. "We'll be sprinkling a large number of villains all over the battlefield, and they'll appear in 3 different varieties, with point values scaled ACCORDYING to difficulty. Your goal, listeners, is to rack up a high score, and never even think about attacking other competitors directly or any of that nasty anti-hero stuff because that's against the rules, capiche?" When Katsuki snorted derision at the last bit, Izuku wasn't surprised. Ignoring that, Izuku concentrated on more crucial matters, such as the fact that the pamphlet they were given showed 4 of the real enemies they were going to be fighting a Robotsa while the screen only showed 3 enemies. Unlike the other 3, the one with the X0 next to it worried him some since it had the multiplying symbol instead of the equal symbol. "Excuse me, might I ask a question?" Izuku lifted his eyes from the pamphlet and concentrated on the student who had got up. He had muscular build and height. He had rectangular jaw, short black hair, rectangular half-rim glasses, and even somewhat rectangular eyes. It surprised Izuku, for some reason, that this man was moving almost mechanically. "This dude has to cool off. Saying something," he thought in surprise, since he already exceeds me in stiffness when I get nervous. On the handout, clearly 4 types of villains listed. Such an error would be the height of embarrassment for a top-tier National Academy of UA's caliber. "The reason we are seated here today is because we seek guidance on the path to become model heroes," he said without waiting for permission to actually ask his question. "This man is really intense," that was the general consensus among all the people there. Present Mike grinned, and Izuku couldn't help but think that the look seemed as mischievous as it was bloodlusty, and spoke. Okay, thanks for the segue. Very appreciated examinee 7111. The 4th type of villain you will encounter is special, you can say. Let's call them arena traps. Have any of you played Super Mario Bros. Before? I doubt it's rather retro. Saying something considering his strong belief on helping everyone, Izuku silently thought that anyone who had not played Super Mario Bros. On this day and age was not worth helping if they found themselves in trouble. Remember people, though, that every rule has an exception. For Izuku, this one fit him. The students watched as the screen shifted to show the outline of the 4th villain next to the thwomp enemy. Present Mike motioned flishly toward the screen. Izuku sighed at exam becoming even more challenging than what it was already shaping up to be since his suspicions were validated. He simply hoped that while still confronting the other villains, avoiding the villain would not prove to be overly difficult. Fortunately, he had mantra at his beck and call always, which he knew would guarantee his avoidance of that villain type. Present Mike spoke once more when everyone calmed down once more following learning that component of the test. He grinned at them all and leered at them with his whirling eyes from behind his sunglasses. "Well, that's enough from me. I'll leave you all with a presentation on the school precepts of this academy of mine. As a cerny hero, by the name of Napoleon Bonaparte once said, now let's move to the main event and may you all suffer gladly the trails to come. Plus ultra. Plus ultra." Several minutes later, Izuku and the other test candidates scheduled for battle location B stood in front of a set of gates and fences enclosing a massive urban scene that had to at least house 30 blocks full of buildings and streets. Aware that this was only one among hundreds of training grounds UA, everyone was in wonder at the grounds. Claimed, some little others could readily double the size of this one. Izuku for his part started to watch everyone and noted all the extra tailored tools that matched their particular needs one way or another. Izuku was not concerned about it since his eccentricities, both hockey and one for all, had no need of additional tools and or machinery, like that belt with a jewel that pretty blonde guy with sparkling eyes was sporting. Though that was something he could some thought about later, truthfully Izuku only needed to consider for his hero costume that it wouldn't be limiting in some way he could somehow increase the damage of his already shockingly strong attacks. Rather, he saw Ochako palming her chest and was slightly sweating, clearly trying to relax her nerves. Happy she was assigned to the same area as him and started to walk in her direction, subconsciously loving how good she looked in her tracksuit. I see what you were up to. You were planning to measure that girl's ability to concentrate, weren't you? After asking about it, Izuku turned to the accusing voice and narrowed his eyes at the stiff-looking teen with glasses that had spoken before being granted permission to speak. He asked him rhetorically with a sharp tone of voice that carried on, bringing all others' conversation to a slow stop. No, I am not. Has it occurred to you that we might know each other and that I just wanted to assure her that she was going to do great as long as she gave it her all? Hey, isn't that the kid that arrived here already ready for this? He was most likely tense about this. We all are, but if he is so absent-minded there is nothing to worry about him. Izuku easily ignored all the comments he heard. Shortly later, he would demonstrate to them his actual capacity. Rather he concentrated on the stiff lad, who turned from him towards Ochako, who was staring at him with concern, before nodding to himself and bowed sharply, somehow producing a perfect 90 degrees angle with his body. Even if he spoke stiffly, Izuku could hear the sincerity and honest guilt in his voice. I'm deeply sorry, my friend. Being as stressed as I am right now, I assumed you wanted to obstruct our fellow test takers. I hope you find in your heart to forgive my transgression. Izuku groaned and shook his head, grinning slightly in amusement. Don't sweat it, man. Just try to consider all possible scenarios and assume the best until the opposite has been proven in cases like this one, he advised, gently squeezing the youngster on his shoulder. The stiff lad nodded, then walked away almost precisely. Again shaking his head in fun, Izuku turned to face Ochako, who was broadly grinning at him and giving him a double thumb up. He laughed, nodded at her with his own smile, and then backhanded the motion. Izuku then rolled his shoulders and gave little jumps on the balls of his feet while he changed his mask to cover his lower half of his face. He was going to need all his senses to perform best, thus he dared not start any music. Present Mike yelled suddenly at that. Quadruple A and start. Create. Warrior A disturbed. Izuku only had to hear that and see the gates open unexpectedly, displaying the robotic enemies already strewn over the streets. He burst into a full-on sprint, his speed rising with increasing length of run, and the more improved his legs grew. Though he smiled to himself when he saw Ochako rushing not 2 seconds later after him, he felt the others still standing in apparently shocked uncertainty. Reaching the first robotic villain, a one-pointer, he heard Present Mike beginning to say something to the others. Izuku smashed into the vaguely human-shaped robot elbow first, carving through it as if it were not even there. Channeling armament hockey into his right arm until it covered his arm until halfway up his biceps. With his left he grabbed one of the arms about to fly due to the force of the collision that just destroyed the robot and channeled armaments up to the same level as his right arm and threw the arm towards a two-pointer, destroying that one too. Barely pausing, Izuku moved forward and in an instant was in front of a three-pointer that looked vaguely like a tank, and he jumped over it, his right foot lashing out and smashing the body to metallic bits and its wheel too as he grabbed its 2 rocket launchers and tore them off easily. Again, without stopping, and without even looking for that matter, Izuku whirled around and sent the 2 explosive devices straight collision with another one-pointer and another two-pointer standing on the street in front of him. Only for a one-pointer to blast a spray of bullets to his face, he immediately went through the fires and smokes of the explosion, creating a shockwave that dispersed them due to the force generated by his moving speed. Not stopping, Izuku simply raised his left arm to cover his face and body with his forearm, mantra letting him see the path the bullets followed and where they were all aimed. Up to roughly his elbow, the jacket's sleeve from his tracksuit was ruined, exposing armament's shiny blackness not even straying against the bullet assault. Izuku almost carelessly backhanded the one-pointer into a wall with his left arm, breaking it. Not a second later he raised his right arm, blocking the scorpion's stinger like a two-pointer's tail. He quickly grabbed the two-pointer's tail and spinning twice in place he sent it flying in collision a three-pointer, resulting in a fiery explosion that caught 2 one-pointers that were nearby. He grinned behind his mask at the harsh sound of metal bending. Looking up, Izuku noticed 4 one-pointers peeking over the edge of 2 buildings at either side of the street. Izuku shot forwards, creating a crater and another shockwave dispersing the smoke of the third explosion he had produced. Izuku couched slightly, right in front of the 2 one-pointers. He smacked into the edge of the building with concrete breaking power, and they straight aimed at him. Izuku forced the arm he grabbed to aim at the one-pointer shooting at him after grabbing the arm of one of the one-pointers and tilting his head aside to avoid the spray of bullets from the other one that passed by his ear harmlessly. The bullet Izuku forced the other one-pointer to fire into caught the energy core of the robot, destroying the one-pointer in a small explosion. When bullets sprayed into it had yet to adjust their aiming to actually hit Izuku. Izuku firmed his hold around the one-pointer used as a springboard to shoot himself backwards in a straight line with direction towards the edge of the other building that had the other 2 one-pointers, dragging the one-pointer with him and destroying the edge of the first building in the process. Still hanging from the cracked edge of the building, he whirled around still in midair and threw the one-pointer at the one to his right, wiping out both of them. Then he smacked with great force into the edge of the second building, shattering the concrete and breaking the windows adjacent. He backhanded the arm that went to shoot him, sent it flying away, and grabbed the remaining one-pointer with both of his hands and leaned back until the robot's upper half was past the edge of the building and he was able to look upside down at the remaining robot villain on the street, a 3-pointer that had already its rocket's launcher aimed at him. Izuku narrowed his eyes and launched himself towards the 3-pointer using his legs once more, treating the edge of the other building the same way he smacked into first. The 3-pointer fired her rockets at Izuku, who quickly covered himself with the body of the one-pointer. The black smoke of the successive explosions smashing into Izuku's shield momentarily blinded him and stopped his momentum. Izuku flew out of the smokescreen when the 3-pointer was reloading. The one-pointer dropped to less than half of what it was with the metal burned black. Rising slowly, Izuku turned to see the path of devastation he had created. When he saw the shocked and awestruck faces of the other competitors, Ochako included, his lips twitched in delight as most of them, categorized as a non-entity for his supposed nervousness, looked at the destruction caused by whom most of them categorized. 9 one-pointers, 3 2-pointers and 3 3-pointers. That sums up 24 points. Hey, this is easier than I thought it would be. Extremely fun too, he said to himself, his muffled voice still somehow widening in astonishment at the amount of points he had raked off already. Less than 30 seconds had passed since President Mike asked to begin the test. The shell-shocked group apparently got their wits about them and with fresh-found determination moved further into the city, reluctant to be left behind. Izuku was moving again. Tenya Iida, the stiff lad, cursed to himself as he used his quirk, Engine, to reach the villains faster than the others, but, shocked he was not as fast as Izuku, who he could see carving a path of destruction across another street full of robots. Just who the hell is that child? More especially, how strong is that quirk of his? Beginning to destroy robotic villains as quickly as he could, he pondered. Ochako, for her part, hurried to find her own robots to dispose of, but the picture of Izuku, slowly rising from the ground after readily defeating all those robotic villains, burned into her head and made her flush across her cheeks. She shook her head quickly and smacked her cheeks as a one-pointer materialized around the bend. Focus, female. You might daydream about how awesome Deku-kun is later on. She tapped the robot with her hand, canceling its weight and sending it into a wall and obliterating it. She thought fast to herself. Grinning, she spun around to confront more of those evil people. Inside the observing room, meanwhile, the current UA staff members were staring at several screens displaying the most promising candidates undergoing the entrance exam. Wearing a tuxedo, a little humanoid mouse-like creature with dog-like paws and a bear-like face with a scar running across his right eye stared on right at the front with a happy smile. Nothing quite like it to bring everyone's fervor into the open and uncover their skills. A strict time limit, not knowing the amount of villains there are or where they are in a vast battleground, he said joyfully. Another voice, this one from a man sporting a white spacesuit, said, the ability to grasp the situation quickly and accurately. He was staring at the video of a lad with 6 arms apparently searching for more enemies to eliminate. Insights. Another voice, clearly female with a husky and sensual tone, said, the ability to stick a dynamic entry without being late to the party. Tenya Iida drop-kicked a 2-pointer and then used the engines of his calves to increase his speed, so engaging a 1-pointer not 3 seconds later, She watched with interest. Agility. Another, a man, said, the ability to face any obstacle with coolness and composure, his voice coming slightly muffled from his tan gas mask. Though he looked like a cowboy, his dreadlocks were clearly visible even with the hat on his head. As he destroyed a robot with a laser derived from his navel, he was staring at the video of the blonde-haired boy with sparking eyes. Judges. And, of course, trailed off another voice, this one from a man with shoulder-length black hair wearing a black matching outfit and what seemed as very wide tape as a scarf. His palms smoked and he panted with a savage smile. Then he turned to face the video feed of Izuku, who was still destroying villains left and right with no indication of stopping, tiredness or strain. Katsuki, surrounded by wrecked robots, was squarely in front of him. Finally he said, sheer fighting prowess. Looking on the points system, the humanoid mouse said, we can estimate their respective degrees of those basic skills. Oh my, we raked up a promising crop this year, did we not? The raspy voice of Toshinori Yagi in his real form said, we can't be sure of that yet, as he smirked almost knowingly as he turned over the protective barrier preventing anyone from inadvertently touching a red button. He trailed off, pressing the button. The real test starts today. They all watched as the massive form of the fourth villain rose from the ground in all of the battle areas, wasting no time to start wreaking havoc by merely moving and swinging their gigantic metal arms, easily making the examinees despair as they started to run away, both because of the almost immeasurable size of the villain and the fact that they could lose all their hard-earned points if they're as much as faced. All Might solemnly said, there's absolutely no merit in taking on that villain. As a matter of fact, there is a severe penalty if you do so. Someone's true character is revealed when they are faced with an impossible obstacle they cannot overcome. He felt slightly disappointed when he saw absolutely everyone that was near where the fourth villain appeared frantically screaming and running away. But when he saw something that hardly surprised him on the screen he had been most concentrating on, he grinned fiercely. But it presents an opportunity. Few seconds earlier, shouted Izuku cheerfully as he punched the last two-pointer of that street to oblivion, and that's 95 points. Laughing, he said, man, I don't know what I was feeling nervous earlier. This type of tests are my cup of tea. He turned back to hunt more villains. Though it might be sufficient to get more than 100 points, which had to be some sort of record, Izuku felt like setting it since he still had roughly 2 minutes or less. He turned around a corner and saw many of the other contenders more than 100 feet away battling robots and vying against one another for the right to destroy a robot without somehow using their quirks on one another. The villain robots for other, less dangerous people resulted from his inability to sustain the pace at which he acquired points the moment the others entered the conflict sincerely. Izuku basically had to search for targets using passive mantra, then go around demolishing the moving robots across the streets and buildings. He couldn't use King's Will on them to make them stumble since they were dead and lacked a real sense of self and will of their own. Fortunately, his increased speed was sufficient to make their mobility essentially moot. It also worked to his advantage since, for some reason, the other competitors stayed in disorganized groups vying for robots to destroy. Execute. Headstrong A-trapped. Not anything to do here, really. When the ground started to shake, Izuku considered going to another place and turned around to do exactly that. When he stared on as large volumes of dust and trash rose from the ground about 50 feet away and in front of the group Izuku had been observing for the past seconds as the sound of metal cord snapping was heard, his eyes grew wide. Rising from the ground until it dwarfed the tallest skyscraper of the training ground by a great margin, a massive silhouette could be seen obscured by the dust. As it grabbed one of the buildings with its right hand and cocked its left one back as it stared blankly at the group of heroes in front of it, its great arms swept around and that action created strong winds that cleared the dust, exposing the humongous form of the fourth villain. This one should be the one you engage to zero all the points you have accumulated. What in the real fuck? As he watched the enormous robot throwing a punch into the ground, causing the earth to shake once more and kicking up more dust and trash, Izuku screamed in his mind. How are we supposed to avoid that and yet fight the other robots concurrently? That is unfeasible. He thought furiously, sighing with relief when he saw the group escape the robot's massive fist from flattening them. Better get out of here before that thing gets close, said Izuku, glancing lastingly in the direction where the student population was fleeing the slowly advancing fourth-type robotic villain, and he froze. Looking past the approaching people, He saw Ochako grunting in agony as her legs were caught under a slab of concrete in such a way that she couldn't use her quirk to make the concrete weightless, which would let her escape. Clearly made to reach for Ochako's injured form with its robotic hand opened wide in a threatening manner as the enormous robot. Let instincts take over, Izuku flooded his legs with armament and shot forward, everything behind him breaking apart and being flown back due to the speed of his takeoff as the sound of air being displaced forcefully was heard. He avoided the fleeing students using mantra. Only Tenya could see him as he went by. What is that idiot thinking? Does he harbor a death wish? Moreover, does he not recall that confronting that villain brings your points back to 0? Doesn't he trail off as he turns around only to find the fourth villain reaching for her trapped Ochako? Oh, shit. Izuku bent his right leg and channeled one for all towards him before flexing his muscles and shooting himself upward in a green, black and white blur, cracking the entire street and creating another shockwave that dispersed the dust generated by the attack of the fourth villain along with breaking what windows had not been broken yet. Forcefully stepping on the ground with his right foot a few dozen feet away from where Ochako was. Startled, Ochako looked up and felt a block of ice slumping down her gut. Deku-kun, not at all. Izuku went cleanly through the approaching hand of the humongous villain, stopping its downward momentum and reversing it so now the whole arm was moving upward with little explosions now passing through its length. His left hand was in front of him. Izuku concentrated on the blank face of the villain and narrowed his eyes as he cocked his right fist and the whole right sleeve of his tracksuit was shredded, exposing to everyone viewing how his entire arm was covered in the shiny black substance as red veins of power appeared running down its lengths and giving the shiny blackness a darker silvery hue. Tears collected at Izuku's eyes corner, one for all armamentsa. Yes. An opportunity for it to shine brightly and rise to the surface, spoke Yagi proudly as they all watched Izuku moving forward to face the villain the moment he caught sight of the incapacitated Ochako without hesitation. When the staff saw him fearlessly rising to meet the villain head-on, going through his hand and destroying his arm, everyone started to smile in exhilaration. That's right. The most important quality of a true hero, he said, fighting the impulse to not turn into his all-might form as he saw Izuku's armament-covered arm getting further enhanced with his manifestation of one for all. For self-sacrifice is nothing nobler, nothing purer. With tears running down his cheek as he remembered the months spent training with All Might, his encouraging words and the proud smile on his face as he looked on at him as he gave it his all to be worth of what his idol saw, Izuku tightened his fist and battered out, without pausing to even consider the repercussions of his activities, with his right arm. First gear. As yet another shockwave was generated by Izuku's punch being sufficient to break the sound barrier. The blow caught the massive robot exactly in the face and blew it off cleanly of its body. The momentum of the punch also affected the body of the massive robot, sending it violently and shockingly fast skidding across the ground as its parts started to blow one by one. Those observing were further shocked and/or impressed. Everyone watched as the villain left path of destruction that was only stopped by the massive fence, which had the head of the villain deeply embedded in it, made of sterner stuff than the fourth villain thought. If everyone looked they would see that the walls were bent outward by the momentum carried by the massive body of the villain, which went up in a gigantic fiery explosion few seconds after it was stopped by the fence. Nobody ventured to make a sound as Izuku dropped the ground gently, his right arm quivering slightly as he apparently took in the damage he had just created. Put down playing, headstrong a trapped. Izuku turned around and with his hair covering his eyes and breathing mask hiding the rest of his face, none could tell what he was feeling right now as his form slouching slightly, shoulders clearly sagging. He moved toward the piece of trash covering Ochako, kneeled, and with his left arm black turned black he readily pulled it off and away from her. "Are you alright, Ochako-chan?" he asked her, his muted voice sounding dull to the ears of those that could hear him. Ochako tried to stand but she sobbed in agony. Her left ankle's sharp throb made it impossible for her to get up. She said, one eye closed in agony, My ankle." But she paid more attention to more crucial concerns. She turned her attention to Izuku almost in tears. Desperate, she said, "I'm sorry, Deku-kun. I'm so sorry," looking up at him from her ground-level position. Izuku surprised everyone when he knelt down next to Ochako and gently scooped her up in a bridal carry. He shook his head lightly, removed his breathing mask to let it hang loosely around his neck. He raised his head and Ochako gasped at the tears running down his cheeks, but he was relievedly smiling at her. He said gently, his tone real but still a little monotonous. "That's not important, Ochako-chan. What's important is that you were okay and no one else got hurt." Unable of communication, Ochako merely nodded me weakly and avoided his eyes. Ochako in his arms, Izuku gently moved towards the other pupils, all of them staring at him with wide, disbelieving eyes. Based on his performance at the very beginning of the test, everyone there knew he had probably raked up the most points. Thus, they also knew he had voluntarily given all those points away to save Ochako, shooting his chances of entering UA to the trash can. He did that voluntarily and without second thought. "Time up," came the sudden shout of Present Mike, but no one in battle location B was paying attention to that. Instead, they were concentrating on Izuku and decision to save Ochako, so losing all his points. Tenya thought to himself, of course, if it wouldn't have been a test with so much at play I would have done the same, but it wouldn't be until later tonight that he would realize just how hollow and false his thoughts had been. "Go homies, lads," she gently said, "I'll take it from here," approaching and reaching into one of the pockets of her immaculate lab coat. "Just leave it to me, boys. Ah, I see that there have been some injuries. Here, enjoy some Haribo candies, don't be shy now," she said as she handed everyone she passed some candies. Eventually she reached Izuku and Ochako and she looked at his still slightly shaking right arm and Ochako's limply hanging left foot. "I swear, these tests are becoming more careless every year," she said angrily. So she is recovery girl," he said dingly as he watched her lips stretch miraculously as she kissed Ochako's leg. Ochako turned toward recovery girl and smiled gently and gratefully at her. "Thank you," she said softly. After a few moments Ochako sighed in relief as the terrible throbbing slowly went away until there was no trace of it. She handed Ochako some sweets and said, "No biggie, girlie," turning to face Izuku and staring him hard. "Are you going to be alright, sonny boy?" Izuku nodded his head. "Yeah, don't worry about it. Look down to your right arm and see that while it is still shaking, it is clearly less intense than before. I simply went somewhat above my quirk's current limit for what my body can manage. In a few minutes, my arm's ligaments and nerves ought to relax." "Not what I was asking." Recovery girl shook her head and used her quirk on his arm. After a few moments Izuku shrugged his shoulders. "What's done is done and I don't regret saving Ochako-chan." Her lips twitched before she looked down at her totally healed arm. "I did the right thing independent of what others say or the outcomes." He started to walk away, only pausing to look at a guilty-looking Ochako, who was failing at controlling her tears. "It wasn't your fault, Ochako-chan," he said with a slightly thick voice as he battled not to cry. "Nobody expected that, thus stop accusing yourself. Though we won't be not attending UA, I simply hope we could become friends. Alright then, in the future? Very." Once more unable to talk, Ochako nodded deeply with her lower lip shaking. Greater than she needed to speak with a few people, and they would listen to what she had to say or else. "I'm sorry. I'm apologies," cried Izuku as he wrapped his arms around his mother, finally letting the tears fall freely as the consoling hug of his mother broke through his defenses as if they weren't even there. "Shish, sweetheart. I am right here." Rather, she concentrated only on being there for him since, as his mother, that was all she could do and exactly what Izuku needed right now. Momo was lounging on her couch reading a book on advanced chemistry as she waited for Izuku to text her about how he had passed with flying colors. She had been worrying about it all day and had busied herself finishing her bookcases and kitchen. After a week spent settled on her suite, that was the last bit of chores she needed to do before she was finished. Momo had to finish everything involved with moving to another city and Izuku had to concentrate just on passing his entrance tests. So, they decided that their outing, which was scheduled for tomorrow, would be in honor of Momo moving in and Izuku getting accepted into UA. Izuku had only been exchanging texts through the week, instead of meeting and hanging out like they both wanted. Momo had no doubt that Izuku would not be accepted, even if his quirk was not about enhancing his body to untold degrees, making him essentially omniscient within a certain range and allowing him to basically intimidate those weaker than him in spirit into submission with his presence alone. Izuku had the perfect mindset for becoming a hero, which he showed her when he jumped in to help her, dispatching those 3 disgusting men without even using his quirk. "Hey." Her voice shook a little while responding. "Is this Momo Yaoyorozu-san?" First of all, the voice from the other end was not Izuku's. It was the voice of a woman. If that wasn't disturbing enough, it was the voice of a woman who had lately been crying. Indeed, this is her speaking. To whom am I speaking? She asked softly, feeling negatively about this. This is Inko Midoriya, the mother of Izuku is here. Momo shot to her feet, her chemistry book falling to the ground. Her eyes grew wide. Midoriya-san. What transpired? Is Izuku-kun okay? She asked desperately, fearing the roast. She knew that UA entrance exams were difficult and those taking them tended to get injured, but there was Recovery Girl to take care of their injuries right away before they became too severe. Still, she feared the worst. Don't fret, Yaoyorozu-san. At least practically, Izuku is good. She trailed off, clearly struggling back tears, and her voice shook. Midoriya-san. Vibrant, Izuku. He reported to me he failed the entrance exam. He is not going to UA. Oh. Well, fuck. I am an idiot, Izuku thought to himself as he sat on the floor, resting his head on his mattress and staring blankly at his room's roof. The position was made particularly uncomfortable by the fluffy rug that covered the entire floor. Izuku's occasional eye blink and the soft up and down motion of his chest during his breathing were the only signs of life at the moment. What in the world was I thinking when I ruined the damn thing? He sighed with sadness, realizing that once again he had let his body move naturally and trusted his instincts when it came to saving someone in serious danger. I could have just as easily grabbed Ochako-chan and got her out of harm's way and I still would have been accepted at UA, he said. In retrospect, he realized that he could handle the matter without endangering his chances of getting into UA, but there were a few factors to take into account, all of which had to do with Izuku's character. Had he merely moved to clear Ochako's path, the other examinees would have been helpless against the overwhelming power of the times zero pointer, which would have undoubtedly caused them to suffer serious injuries or worse. Furthermore, just being near the villain counted as facing it, meaning that anyone who would have been harmed by the villain would have had their points eliminated, eliminating any possibility of entry. Izuku knew this in his subconscious when he moved in to step in and did what he believed was the best thing he could do to help everyone. He gave up his only chance of getting into the school in order to ensure that Ochako and the others weren't seriously hurt and that they also kept their chances of getting in. Ultimately, how did the destiny of a single individual compare to that of 39 others? Izuku also found it difficult to be upset about the injustice of it all and the other examinees, despite his best efforts. The majority of the other examinees went and did just that after they had all been warned about the dangers of confronting the trap villain. In fact, they had even been told that they would go on the rampage if a crowd gathered close to it. To be honest, Izuku had every right to be upset with whoever he chose, but right now his deep sense of self-loathing and disappointment overshadowed any chance of him feeling that way. And yet, tears welled up at the corners of his eyes, accompanied by a rueful smile. Even though doing the right thing would have had negative effects on me, I was still able to do it. Izuku was deeply relieved that he had been able to remain loyal to himself and his principles, whether consciously or unconsciously, even though it meant that he would ultimately come out on the short end of the stick. Knowing that, I can't help feeling somewhat glad that things turned out like that. Ultimately, that was his true nature. A person who genuinely desired to assist others in every way possible. I suppose I can't be too depressed as long as I stay true to who I am. I can still apply to other hero schools, after all. He sighed and lifted his head off the bed, allowing the tears to fall down his face until his chin rested against his upper chest. I really wanted to go with Momo-chan, and Ochako-chan too, but I guess that's not to be, he thought in resignation. I know that, and I understand exactly what it is that I am experiencing and why, but why won't this excruciating tightness in my chest go away? Knock. Knock? Izuku-kun? Huh? Izuku asked, blinking in surprise as he turned to face the door after hearing a knock and immediately hearing Momo's hesitant, muffled voice coming from the other side. What the hell? Was I so impacted by what transpired that I failed to notice Mantra's informational drip feed? Nothing like this has ever occurred before. What's wrong with me? Shaking his head angrily, he focused on his thoughts. Yes? He inquired in return. Had he not known that his mother was standing just a few feet away from her and appeared concerned, he never would have wondered why she was here the day after failing the exams. Momo remained silent for a moment before continuing. May I please enter? I would like to have a conversation with you, she said softly from the other end. Izuku was briefly tempted to tell her no because he didn't want to see the pitying and disappointed expression on her face, but he quickly dismissed those thoughts when he realized how absurd they were. Momo would not have gone to see him in the first place, much less spoken to him with such tender compassion that the excruciating tightness in her chest slightly eased, if she had been in the slightest bit disappointed in him. He gave a defeated sigh. He called out, quickly wiping away his tears with his shirt sleeves. "Yeah, come on in." Less than 2 seconds later, Momo softly opened the door, and she saw Izuku, a person she knew to be very positive, as sitting on the floor, leaning his upper body against his bed, his eyes a little red from tears. This made her heart sink a little. It did not suit him at all, that depressed look on his face that she was kind of glad to see perked up a bit when he saw her. She said to him, "Oh, Izuku-kun," before moving to sit next to him, encircling him in her arms, and giving him a hug. Izuku blushed at first, feeling Momo's mature body pressing against him from her tight hug, but then he realized she was trying to console him, so he temporarily set those thoughts of betrayal aside and allowed himself to be hugged by someone he considered to be his first friend of that age. Because of their shared love of books and their sincere desire to use their eccentricities to benefit others, they felt like they had a genuine connection. Izuku, who was already feeling a little better from the touch, returned the hug with a head resting on Momo's shoulder. With hesitation, Inko glanced over her shoulder. What she saw made her sigh with relief and let out an internal squeal of delight at Momo and Izuku hugging. Izuku grinning slightly as he rested his head on her shoulder, and she comfortingly ran her hands through his hair. They were so adorable that Inko was tempted to snap a photo, but she knew it was not the right moment. Instead, she thanked the gods above in her mind for letting Izuku meet Momo, since she genuinely believed the girl was the only one who could cheer him up. With a silent farewell, she wished her luck. Naturally, Izuku had felt what his mother had felt, and he secretly relieved herself when she did nothing to make him look bad in front of Momo. They released each other after a few seconds, and Izuku turned his head away while blushing slightly. Even though he mumbled, "Thank you," his sincere tone was still audible. Momo simply smiled at him, a blush of her own spreading across her lovely face. She said softly, "You're welcome," before moving a little closer and taking his hand. She gave his hand a reassuring squeeze as he turned to face her, an adorable, curious flush on his face. "Please tell me what happened," she said quietly. After a few moments, Izuku was able to gather his composure and turned his head away from her, his face wearing a begrudging smile. "We had to fight robotic villains in an urban setting for the practical exam. We were separated by training grounds, and there were 4 types of villains, each one of them worth a set of points that increased with the amount of difficulty they each had. One of them, however, was a trap villain, and if you faced it would reduce the amount of points you had back to 0. I thought that evading that villain while continuing to fight the other villains wasn't going to be too difficult, thanks to the mantra aspect of hockey, but I wasn't counting on that villain to be bigger than Mount Lady when she used her quirk." When Momo heard that, her eyes grew wide, but she said nothing, letting Izuku carry on. "We were told that the trap villain was going to start to rampage if a crowd formed near where it was. T was the reason why I stayed alone, destroying the villains I found as I ran circles through the training ground. When the 4th villain surfaced, I had already accumulated 95 points. My first thought was that I needed to get away as fast I could to avoid it, but then I heard the screaming and saw many of the other examinees running away from it. That was when I saw a girl I have just met a few minutes before trapped beneath a piece of debris about to be crushed in Ia," he continued, looking down with sorrow. Momo gave him an understanding smile, losing her wide-eyed expression and tilting her head. Momo laughed and tapped the side of Izuku's head with 2 fingers to get his attention. "You went and stopped the trap villain, saving that girl and losing all the points you had accumulated thus far, am I right?" Momo asked, getting Izuku to nod in agreement. She laughed at the wide-eyed, almost deceitful expression on his face as he realized how clearly amused he was. "I'm sorry, Izuku-kun, but as intelligent as you are still an idiot." Izuku's perceptive and elegant reply was, "What?" Momo laughed heartily once more. With a still amused expression, she asked, "Tell me, Izuku-kun, what makes a hero? What is it that makes you consider someone truly a hero?" There was no mistaking the gravity of the question. Izuku's expression changed from one of confusion to thoughtfulness in a split second. He was aware that Katsuki, for example, would respond by saying that a real hero was someone who had a strong quirk and always prevailed, so he knew that response was incorrect. Rather, his thoughts turned to All Might, the one person he believed to be the greatest and most authentic hero of them all. The response arrived right away. A true hero is someone that can save anyone with a smile on their face no matter the situation. Momo grinned more broadly. There was no way in hell that UA considered the ability to destroy robots as the only qualification for acceptance. Exactly. Now, I'm sure that examiners closely monitored all the examinees to determine to what class they were best suited, taking into consideration their quirk, aptitude and all that, correct? In addition, the esteemed academy offered other courses besides the hero course. Examples of these included general education, support, and management. Izuku agreed and nodded, not sure where she was taking this. She twitched her lips when she realized that Izuku was still not getting it. That means the examiners saw what you did when you decided to sacrifice your hard-earned points to save a girl that was about to be badly harmed by a villain that had a penalty should you face it, she said. Do you really think UA High School, the heroics academy with most renown in Japan, is not going to accept someone that would willingly do that despite having accumulated the most points in the practical exam, not only of his own examination division but quite possible out of everyone there taking the exam? He replied rhetorically with an amused expression. Izuku blinked slowly for a few seconds while staring at her indifferently. Oh, he said softly in realization before his eyes widened in shock. Oh, he exclaimed as a grin appeared on his face. Hey, you're entirely correct. The purpose of the practical entrance exams is to assess our aptitude. It goes beyond just seeing how we can use our peculiarities in battle. Then a look of disbelief and annoyance crossed his face. That means that present Mike tricked us all, he said. Momo grinned broadly and nodded, saying, more likely, she said, her smile softening as she met Izuku's gaze. That situation was definitely a test within a test to find out who truly deserves to be accepted, and showed everyone there, including me, that no one deserves it more than you. The sincerity of her words and the look on her face caused Izuku's blush to turn to atomic levels, and he was so overcome with embarrassment that he could only murmur a thank you and turn his head away, hiding a pleased smile on his face. When your mom called, I thought that you somehow failed because you were unable to meet the passing conditions, but I am glad that you thought you failed because they misled you, Momo said, giggling and allowing her upper body to mirror Izuku's resting against the mattress. You know, I'm really excited to be a pro hero by your side. Izuku turned to face her, still blushing, but he nodded resolutely. I was also looking forward to that, Momo-chan, he said. Believing that I wouldn't be able to go to UA, one of the reasons I was feeling so bad about failing was because of you. I sincerely appreciate that you helped me understand that I was being foolish. His sincere remarks made Momo blush, but she still grinned prettily and cheekily, saying, you are very welcome. Every time you're in a worthless slump, I'll make sure to kick your butt into gear. She winked as she declared with conviction. Naturally, Izuku thought the action was so cute that she could only blush and stutter. She looked very good in that outfit, and the moment that thought went through Izuku's head, steam poured out of his nose and ears, and he looked away, lest she saw the way he was looking at her and thought that he was nothing more than a worthless pervert. Momo giggled before she shot to his feet, and that's when Izuku finally noticed what she was wearing. Mid-calf high boots, jeans that looked almost painted on, and a long-sleeved cream-colored wool turtleneck sweater. Izuku was unaware that Momo was also slyly examining him, and unlike him, she did not hide her admiration for what she saw. He was taller than she was, which was a big plus in her book. His muscles were clearly visible because he was only wearing a white shirt and black shorts, but what really attracted her attention was his intelligence and selflessness. Oh, and did she also mention that he looked good enough to eat? Yeah? Alright, then. She looked at him as he stood up, this time not averting her eyes when he was bent over at the waist while he rose. I don't know if his cluelessness is endearing or annoying, but I can't complain when things like this happen now, can I? She thought to herself, resignedly amused and self-exasperated. I like him. I could do much worse, however, so this not too difficult to accept. Her hands were clasped behind her back as she looked up at him, a woman whose thoughts were not evident in her happy expression. I'll let you get changed and wait for you in the living room. Izuku gave a curious blink. Get changed? Momo looked at him fondly and exasperatedly, her lips quivering slightly. Of course, Izuku-kun. Or did you perhaps forgot that we were supposed to hang out today to celebrate you getting accepted at UA and me moving in, Izuku waved his hands wildly as his eye grew wide. Of course not. Give me 15 minutes and I'll get ready. Momo gave him a warm shake of her hand, nodded, and left the room, shutting it behind her. Izuku let out a sigh and fell onto the bed, gazing at the ceiling with a dreamy smile on his face as soon as she left the room. Who would have guessed that chatting with a girl he had only met a week earlier would be the perfect way to lift his spirits? Furthermore, she showed him that he would not be admitted to the United States of America. It was at best foolish to do exactly what was expected of the profession for which you were trained. She seemed to know just the right thing to say and how to say it. Even his mother had been unable to help him beyond consoling him and telling him that everything would be okay. He thought to himself, blushing, it's official, as he got out of bed and started to undress so he could take a quick shower and avoid having a bad smell. I like her. With a grin on his sunken face, Toshinori Yagi left the examination viewing room. He was still on a high from seeing Izuku perform yesterday, and it didn't hurt to hear everyone applauding him. Izuku had made his first successful step toward becoming a hero, and he was already beginning to take on the characteristics that All Might had envisioned for him. The next symbol of peace, and perhaps even more. His friend Bakugo-kun, with 77 points, was the closest to his score, and young Midoriya-kun easily scored more than twice that. Hell, when I took the practical exam, he even outperformed me, but that's to be expected, he said to himself as he made his way through UA grounds. When it was explained to them that he had at last found a worthy successor, the carefree air surrounding him would not come as a huge surprise to those who were aware of the weight of responsibility he carried. In terms of character, Yagi was certain that Izuku was ideal for One for All. He was already the epitome of what it meant to be a hero. What's more, it came naturally to him rather than via instruction. As if that weren't enough, Izuku had a peculiarity that was almost a perfect match for One for All. To be honest, All Might would have believed that Izuku was born with the intention of inheriting it one day if he had been a believer in such things. Rather, All Might simply dismissed it as a coincidence. He is more deserving than Tagada-kun. He grinned as he tucked his hands into his pants pockets and thought, even Principal Nedzu agreed, if that impressed and pleased nod he gave me was anything to go by. The idea of the third year with the permeation quirk made him a little more serious, which made him consider his former sidekick and the tense relationship they continued to have despite spending more than 5 years without speaking to one another. I believe now would be a good time to take action, he thought to himself. After a short while, Yagi nodded to himself and his sunken face took on a determined expression as he concluded that it was past time for him to make amends with his former sidekick. Since he was the one who caused their cold-blooded breakup, it was his responsibility to initiate contact in an attempt to revive their romance. Even though Yagi believed that he didn't even deserve that for making his old sidekick so miserable by not listening to him when he warned him what would happen if he continued as he was, he just hoped that the time they spent together gave him enough of a chance to be given a second chance by him. All Might understood that the only thing keeping him from listening was his own pride in what he had accomplished of becoming the people's symbol of peace and hope and a deterrent to criminal activity. It was time to make amends between them and, hopefully, return to their previous state of affairs, according to Yagi, who concluded that after all that time and finally giving One for All to someone who would undoubtedly go on to become even more great than himself. Yes. I'll go later this week, he told himself, aware that he would be extremely busy because the entrance exam culmination was only yesterday. An uncertain expression came to his face as he considered his chosen successor while contemplating the examinations. Given his knowledge of Izuku, it's likely that he was punishing himself for not passing and disappointing him, he said, probably, because he was aware of Izuku's high intelligence and the possibility that he had figured out the test within the test. Still, he wouldn't be able to realize it because he would be aware of his tendency to concentrate on one thing. Well, it won't really matter in the end. In 5 days, he will receive his acceptance letter. Nobody has ever died from a few days of brooding. He smiled self-satisfiedly and started to whistle a cheerful song. Plus, I think that'll be a fun joke we can both laugh about later. Let it be known that Toshinori Yagi, aka All Might, had a very cruel and deranged sense of humor. Izuku's week went by fairly well after Momo and he explained to Inko the misunderstanding and that there was no way Izuku was not going to be accepted by UA, except for the first day following the entrance examination, during which he spent most of it in a depressing mood. Following his actions, to Izuku's dismay and Momo's amusement, Inko had attempted to suffocate Izuku with her strongest hug yet and had begun to cry uncontrollably. Izuku was very close to a girl as beautiful as Momo, who clearly held her son in high regard if the fact that she had practically rushed to comfort him was any indication. After that ordeal, when she was told that they were going to hang out, Inko had promptly kicked them out of the house. Izuku had returned to training with the same fervor he had displayed in the latter half of his 10-month training binge, which he had taken part in under All Might's guidance. Naturally, it didn't involve taking care of a ton of trash while honing his control over One for All's output, nor did it involve sparring matches or hopeless attempts to avoid getting hit by the world's greatest hero, Relia, but he was still able to maintain his physique because of the specialized gear All Might bought for him. Even though he was no longer a member of the neighborhood gym, he doubted he would use it. It was useless with the new equipment, and the best part was that his mother could use it too, so even though the money they spent on it didn't make a dent in their finances, they were both against wasting money on things that weren't absolutely necessary. Even though he was aware that he could not possibly be rejected by Ue, Izuku's anxiety increased after his performance because All Might had not gotten in touch with him in the previous 7 days. He had sent him a text outlining the circumstances, and when All Might failed to respond and not even to read the text, he had assumed the worst and that Momo's and his justifications had been wishful thinking because, based on All Might's actions, the world's greatest hero was probably disappointed and furious with him. Izuku had preferred to think of other things, such as his training and other more socially conscious pursuits, because he was unwilling to think in that way. For instance, Izuku communicated with Ochako via text messages in addition to spending his free time hanging out and texting with Momo. That is, when she wasn't expressing regret for her role in his near rejection from Ue and him telling her it wasn't true, they were able to establish what Izuku considered to be a strong friendship. Naturally, it wasn't on the same level as his relationship with Momo, but Izuku's influence allowed him to get that close to her. Izuku felt that with Momo and Ochako, he was well on his way to accomplishing his genuine desire to make friends, having not had a single true friend his age during the period between his breakup with Katsuki and meeting Momo. Izuku was shadow fighting right now in the apartment room that held the gear All Might had brought for his training. Though there were 3 bedrooms in their apartment, this one wasn't used until he began receiving instruction from the world's greatest hero because there were only 2 occupants. The room was large enough to accommodate him and his equipment, as well as provide ample space for him to move around comfortably during the shadow sparring session. He had one of the weighted vest combo sets that All Might had gotten for him on top of his training attire. His range of motion was limited in a way that mimicked being weighted down, enabling an increase in difficulty and intensity without many of the hazards associated with using traditional weights. Abruptly, the door to the room opened, and Inko stormed in, holding a sealed letter in her hand and a look of excitement on her face. "Izuku. It's here," she exclaimed, grinning, and then vanished inside the home. Izuku sighed with relief as he felt the restriction on his movement disappear as he removed the weights and vest from his body. He blinked and laughed as he did so. He laughed and said, "She's even more excited than I am," taking off his shirt, drying himself with a towel, and then putting on a new one. With the letter on the table and his mother bouncing around, he left the room and headed toward the living room. With an almost maniacal expression on her face, she prompted him, "Izuku. Hurry up. Open it. Open it." Izuku assumed that his devoted and loving mother was just exited because he was naive about all things related to her. Despite all the assurances from Momo and her son, it never occurred to him that she wanted to check if her plans to increase the likelihood that Izuku would give her a large number of grandbabies was still feasible. Izuku laughed as he sat on the floor, realizing that his mother would kill him if he sat on the couch in his wet shorts while working out. He carefully opened the letter and let a circular gadget with a projector on top fall to the table. It turned on instantly, and he recoiled as All Might's smiling mug materialized out of nowhere, making his mother cry out in dismay as well. He said, "Testing, 1, 2, while glancing at the camera. Then, he seemed to be signaled something, and he looked up. "Am I on screen already? Okay." Wasn't the envelope from the United States of America? All Might? The hell? Headquarters? Why was All Might there at that moment? Did that really mean? "Sorry for not contacting you during the week, young Midoriya-kun. I was very busy, after all. Besides, I saw your messages and figured that you didn't need to be reassured since you apparently worked out the real test beneath the test you took. I'm glad, but not surprised. Ha 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 ah ha ha ha, he said with an epic flourish that ended with bowing. Izuku twitched her eyes in annoyance. What a bastard, he was aware. Ahem. Now, I believe we will be seeing a lot of each other since I will be working at UA as a teacher. Izuku's eyebrow twitched and his lips quirked as an artery appeared on his forehead. Yes. Izuku was so enraged at the moment that he temporarily forgot that he hadn't yet touched All Might during one of their sparring sessions. I'm going to kill him. It was inevitable that his self-proclaimed mission would fail even before he attempted to execute it. Abruptly, the viewpoint shifted, and All Might was captured from his left profile. All Might turned his head back to face the right camera when a hand materialized from the projection's edge. What's that, citizen? Turn to face camera 2. I was in the middle of telling the kid something importante. You'll fix it in post-production? Alright then, that works. Izuku became weary at the absurdity. His mother looked at him, clearly still in disbelief at All Might's abrupt arrival. As you should know, you aced the written test with almost a perfect score. That was impressive, but that alone does not secure entrance to this prestigious academy. You had scored 95 points, an amount unheard of ever since the current practical portion of the entrance exam was established, until you went on and willingly faced a trap villain that you were told would reduce your points back to 0 should you do precisely that. That would mean that you failed. Izuku's eyes started to twitch again in annoyance as All Might trailed off to add suspense to his words. It was not helping matters at all that his mother was now biting her nails. Had you lot not been tricked to think that, in order to test your true mettle against that kind of odds, there was no such penalty in facing that foe villain. That villain was merely worth 0 points, nothing more and nothing less. That means that you have not lost any points, meaning that you indeed managed to get more than enough points to get a passing grade. Izuku smiled when his mother enthusiastically exclaimed, yes, after hearing that, and he sighed with relief at being confirmed that he had made it in. As she started to endearingly hop around while praising him and stating how amazing he was. Izuku blushed, embarrassed at his mother's behavior, even though there was no one else with them save the holographic projection of All Might, which was unable to see them. But that's not all. The two exclaimed as they pivoted back to face the projection and saw All Might brandishing some sort of controller and pointing it at a screen behind them. His words were epic as he turned the screen on behind him by pressing the bottom. Just so you know, I was likely an entertainer in another life. Behold, this screen. Izuku's eyes expanded upon seeing Ochako's determined face. Ochako-chan? When Inko realized that Izuku knew another girl who was equally adorable as Momo, she started to smile with joy. Whoa, this is better than I had anticipated. Maybe double the number of grandchildren. Aw, I'm so excited. She said, excuse me. Hello, her trembling voice not matching the confident expression on her face. She was talking to Present Mike, who Izuku glared at for convincingly and blatantly lying to the exam takers. Present Mike was grinning at her with curiosity mixed with knowledge. As soon as the test ended, this little lady went to us directly and requested something. What, you ask? Keep watching to find out. Sorry to bother you, but do you remember the tall and muscular guy with curly black hair and green highlights? He has freckles on his face. Oh, he was the one that rampaged through the street the moment the entrance started and the one that destroyed the giant robot just before the exam finished. Do you know of whom I'm talking about? Izuku blinked, startled. That's definitely me. How is she acting? But Inko had other things on his mind. As she went, she gave me a cunning smile and gave Izuku a pointed prod. Tall and muscular, first Momo-chan and now this Ochako-chan, who is just as cute, is my dear and innocent Izuku-chan turning into a womanizer now, Izuku turned red, and he nearly broke his neck by quickly turning his head to the side. Steam was gushing out of every opening on his head as he frantically waved his hands. What are you talking about, Mom? It's not like that, I swear. Just like that, Inko laughed, gave himself a loving pinch on the cheek, and returned his attention to the projection, making the utterly mortified Izuku follow suit. She asked, startling Izuku and Inko into silence as they gaped at the screen. Would it be possible to give my points to him? Her expression took on a resolute scowl as Ochako continued. He was the coolest out there when the exam began, and I'm sure that he was the one with the most points out of all of us. He had every reason to not face the trap villain and none to jump in and face off against it, and yet, he did so to save my life. He lost all his points because of me. So please, give him my points because Tears slowly pooled at the corners of Izuku's eyes as All Might started to talk. Let this be a lesson, young Midoriya-kun. Know that beyond a powerful quirk, which you have twice over, is your noble and selfless actions that touch people. There's no one else that deserves to be accepted by UA more than him. Never forget that. Izuku ignored All Might as he explained that the judges were considering more than just your combat skills with your unique quirk, and he went on to clarify that UA would never turn away a pupil who gave up everything to act morally. Rather, he concentrated on the look of pure relief and happiness that came over Ochako's face when Present Mike informed her that she didn't need to give him any points after explaining to her what the exam actually meant. Izuku Midoriya earned 164 points after taking into account the amount of rescue points he acquired through the test. And since you were also willing to sacrifice yourself to do the right thing, you have earned yourself 20 rescue points, which would sum up a total of 66 points. Congratulations, you both passed the exam with flying colors, but I request you don't tell him that, since only certified personnel of UA such as me can disclose the test results before they are sent to everyone. Do try to reassure him as subtly as you can manage, however. That kid looked mighty depressed when he walked away from here, ya dig? Said Present Mike with a pleased grin as he patted Ochako's head almost as if she was a cute chipmunk or something. He continued to look at her, a gentle smile spreading across his face as he thought fondly, so that's why she always wrote, almost, whenever she apologized. You know, Inko said, glancing at Ochako's joyful expression and applauding the two of them for their accomplishments. I think I love her, even though I just found out her name, she said idly, her smile kind and appreciative. With a similar smile on his face, Izuku nodded absently and answered, yeah, watching Ochako wave goodbye to Present Mike with vigor before making her way out. Me too. All Might exclaimed, you have earned the most points in the history of UA's practical exams ever since the academy was founded, with an epic grin as he flexed his muscles and made a fist in front of his face, nearly tearing his stripped suit apart in the process. Izuku could see how proud he was of himself as he seemed to look directly into All Might's eyes. You certainly went plus ultra and showed everyone here what you are made of and what it means to be a true hero, so, needless to say, welcome to your hero academia, Izuku Midoriya. Izuku. Momo-chan. Hello. My acceptance letter arrived just now, did you also receive yours? Momo. Indeed, I did. I was assigned to Class 1A of the Heroes course. How about you? Izuku. Exactly, it implies that our classes will be together. That is fantastic, D. Momo. I agree, I do too. In this manner, we can assist one another more readily, D. Izuku. You're correct. Hey, secretly, All Might is going to be a faculty member at the University of Alabama. And I believe there's a good chance we'll be getting regular instruction from him directly. Isn't that awesome? Momo. How come? That is really awesome. But hold on a minute. If something like that had been known to the public, it would have undoubtedly made the news. Izuku-kun, how are you so certain of that? Izuku. So, he was the one who informed me that I had been accepted to UA through the letter of acceptance I received. Momo. Really? Oh, how jealous I am. It was Principal Nedzu who informed me that I had been approved. While he may seem cool, he is not All Might. That is unfair. How come you would accept him? Izuku. Alright, so, Momo. Are you Izuku-kun? Are you present? Izuku. Well, I believe it was because I earned the most points out of all of the participants, and I guess I received a bonus for doing so, too. Hee. Carrot. Momo. That makes sense, I see. By the way, how many points did you receive? I believe you told me, but I can't remember exactly how much. You mean 90-something? Izuku. Well, 164, to be exact. Momo. Oh, you mean? However, how? Izuku. Well, yes. Do you recall when I leapt to the rescue to prevent a girl from being crushed by the trap villain? It turns out that not only were my points not taken away, but I also received 69 rescue points for intervening to save her, even though at the time I thought doing so would have the worst possible outcome for me. Underscore. Momo. Izuku-kun, that's nearly twice as much as All Might received for taking the entrance exam. I believe the number was 92 or roughly that. Izuku. Well, 91, to be exact. I think there are 21 rescue points and 70 villain points. Momo. Izuku-kun, of course you would be aware of those specifics. Izuku. Hee. Carrot. Momo. P-Zuku. Whoa, I almost forgot to tell you about the girl I saved. Her name is Ochako Uraraka, and she went to present Mike after the exam and said she wanted to give me her points because she felt bad about what had happened. Momo. I don't even know what she looks like, but I already love her. Really? Oh my god, that's so nice. Izuku. It's true that I want to thank her face to face for what she did, as opposed to, say, sending her a text, which would give the impression that I don't truly understand the motivation behind her actions. Momo. Well, that seems like the best course of action, but while you're at it, I'll give her a big hug for being so kind. 3 at the very least. Let her know that you are aware of what she did so you won't surprise her when you thank her. Izuku. You don't even know her, so I'll do that and hey, I get to hug her first. Momo. Izuku-kun, girl and girl dibs. Izuku. Is that something at all? Momo. It's here now. Less than underscore carrot Izuku. Oh, that's bad. HMPH. Ochako was overjoyed to receive the acceptance letter and confirmation that she would be attending Class 1A of the Hero course, even though she already knew she had passed. While her primary motivation for wanting to become a hero was to earn enough money to support her parents comfortably without them having to work as much, she also genuinely wanted to use her quirk. Zero gravity was too useful to waste. Her celebration came to an abrupt stop when she felt her phone vibrate from her shorts pocket and reached for it, perking up when she saw that it was a message from Deku-kun and hurrying to unlock it so she could read it, only to have her face turn white, first with an expression of horror and then, in the blink of an eye, turn tomato red. Oh my god, he knows. He probably thinks that I'm some kind of weirdo. Someone kill me now, please. She cried as she leapt to her bed and squealed in desperation, incredulity, and mortification into her pillow as she pressed it against her face. Steam was pouring out of her ears. Kya. Pause. Ouya. Next to her, her cell phone had fallen screen side up with a conversation showing the last message she received, and Ochako rubbed the spot on her head where she had hit when she crashed into the floor after falling from her bed because she had misjudged how far it had fallen. Deku-kun. I nearly turned down the offer. Toshinori was admiring the stunning sunset that could be seen from the Dagoba Municipal Beach Park when he buffed up, turned around, spread his leg, and raised his guard to cover his face. It was a good thing he did, because he was suddenly confronted by Izuku, who had his right arm cocked back and covered halfway up his biceps, looking annoyed. All-powerful, you depraved bastard. He yelled angrily as he unleashed a vicious blow that caused a shockwave that lifted sand as soon as it struck All Might's forearm. All Might winced a little as he was pushed back, luckily behind his arms, and his feet made a trench in the beach's sand. With a healthy dose of disbelief, he thought, I knew there was a reason my instincts told me to dodge his attacks instead of blocking them or even parrying them. For fuck's sake, they hurt like a bitch even if they are only covered with armament hockey. I do not envy that robot that got hit by his first gear. After he stopped being pushed back after a few hundred feet or so, he lowered his arms slightly and gave Izuku a glimpse of his smiling face, as if to indicate to him that his punch had been ineffective. Of course, it's commendable to take on villains, but I think it's a little disrespectful to take on your mentor and potential teacher at your school. Izuku took it all in stride, simply righting himself with a backflip and landing halfway before he reached where All Might was standing when he attacked him. He rose to his feet and glared at said mentor and future teacher, his smoking blackened fist shaking as his entire face twitched in anger. You knew that I was going to be accepted and said nothing. All Might suddenly spread his arms wide and sent Izuku flying away, and he went further thanks to the strong winds generated by All Might's actions. What if I wasn't able to figure out the test's actual purpose on my own? Ah, but that was nothing but a masterful and harmless prank from my part, All Might said, putting his feet on his waist and tossing his head back as he laughed loudly. I wasn't concerned because I knew you would eventually figure it out on your own. Ah. It took a friend of mine basically spelling it to me that I wasn't going to not be accepted for doing the right thing, you asshole, Izuku said, gritting his teeth as a vein burst from his forehead. I would have cried and moped about being a failure for the entire week if she hadn't been there. A week without exercising. What does that mean, exactly? Yeah, I have gone more than a week without exercising. All Might shrugged callously. You can return to your previous level of fitness after 2 weeks of working out at twice the difficulty and intensity of before the break. Nothing to be concerned about. In addition, you matured enough to acknowledge that you were in tears. I believe my practical joke worked out well, don't you think? I'm going to kill you, Izuku roared, his other arm and both legs covered in armament. Green lightning shot from his body as he glared at All Might, his face a green that reminded him of Katsuki's when he got particularly angry. Ah, young Midoriya-kun, All Might tutted at Izuku, swinging his index finger in the typical, no, motion. You need to let go of your evil mindset. You won't benefit if you allow a to rule over you. All Might was rudely and suddenly interrupted when he had to duck in order to avoid a roundhouse kick courtesy of Izuku that would have surely sent him sprawling had he decided to block it. Oops. Bad. You should try to catch me, young Midoriya-kun. Come on over and accept your manly punishment. And so, while a random couple was enjoying the romantic atmosphere, they were treated to the incredibly bizarre spectacle of a laughing All Might making fun of a teenager who had green lightning arcs arching from his body and black substance covering his arms. The teenager was attacking the number one hero with deadly abandon, and All Might was able to dodge his attacks with seemingly little effort. The teenager was cursing the hero repeatedly, but All Might just gave him more advice on how to make his attacks more effective. I know this is just our third date, but you are so getting laid tonight, the woman said simply, turning to her partner with an enigmatic expression on her face as she watched All Might and the teenager fade into the distance. Izuku unintentionally gained his most devoted fan and supporter on that day after unintentionally and inexplicably helping to have sex with the girl of his dreams after only 2 dates and nearly 2 months of courting her. A true hero offered assistance to anyone in need. 3 weeks had passed since they received their acceptance letters, and with it came the first day of classes at UA High School. Izuku spent his time studying a wide range of new subjects, which when combined with his physical training also gradually increased the amount of hockey energy he had at his disposal to prolong the time he could keep himself enhanced. He also worked out, gradually and slowly increasing the intensity of it in order to augment his capabilities with his quirk in a manner that wouldn't make it too hard for him to get used to the gradual increase of speed and strength. When it came to new subjects to study, Momo was a veritable treasure trove, and she gladly assisted him in that regard. He and Momo also spent some time together, more for Momo's benefit than anything else, but they were both clearly fond of each other's company and, at this point, were just looking for reasons to spend time together, much to their own amusement and embarrassment. Additionally, Izuku texted Ochako on a regular basis, but regrettably, there had not yet been a chance for them to meet in person because she lived so far away. The fact that it took her 2 days to respond to the first text he sent her, which he started doing to reassure himself that she knew he knew what she did, was enough to satisfy him. It was a chore not to start thanking her profusely over text about what she tried to do to help him. Instead, he settled for gently teasing her about it. Every time he made a subtle comment about it, he could almost literally feel her embarrassment through her texts, which made him laugh. Let it be known that, unbeknownst to Izuku, All Might's sick and sadistic sense of humor was beginning to seep into his being. In the time that elapsed between getting the acceptance letter and the first day of classes, he also brainstormed costume ideas. To his annoyance, he was unable to really think of anything that enhanced or complemented the abilities of his quirk. Because of the way King's Will and passive mantra functioned, they could not be enhanced, and at this point, active mantra grew in proportion to the amount of hockey energy he had available. More hockey energy could be added to armament to improve it, and the less said about one for all, the better. Rather, he chose a costume that would boost his damage output even in the absence of his quirks, but only in the event that he enhanced himself using his quirks. Izuku looked at himself in the living room's full-length mirror, adjusting the wireless red and green headphones around his neck while nodding. His mother had given him those as a congrats on being accepted to UA, and Izuku pondered whether she chose them especially because they complemented his uniform and hair highlights. The outfit included a red necktie, a light gray suit over a white dress shirt, and dark green dress pants. His pants covered up the fact that he was wearing red and gray tennis shoes that hung above his ankles. Izuku picked up his green backpack and strapped it to his shoulders so that it rested comfortably against his back, deciding he looked decent enough. He said, "I'm heading off now, Mom," as he made his way to the door. His mother called to him, "Izuku," as he reached for the doorknob and turned it to open. He held the door open and gave her a curious look back, his green eyes blinking in anticipation of her words. She smiled and raised her right fist in the air, cupping her bicep with her left hand. "I'm super proud of you. Just keep doing what you always do, and that's never going to change, you know that, right? Now, go on and give them hell, honey," she said. Izuku excitedly nodded at his mother, beaming with joy. "You're damn right, I will," he exclaimed, waving to her before leaving the house and shutting the door. When that occurred, Inko squealed and jumped quickly in place, her once proud smile changing to one of childlike excitement. "And make sure to secure a lot of future grandbabies for me to spoil rotten. Kya ha 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 ha." As he finished adjusting his headphones and configuring them to pair via Bluetooth with his phone, Izuku shivered with fear outside. He chose to ignore the unexpected and abrupt chill that shot down his spine, turned his phone to random, and put his favorite songs on his playlist before pocketing it. Shutting his eyes, he exhaled and started walking toward the station, which was roughly 30 minutes away from his residence if you strolled leisurely. Izuku never did things in a hurry, so an hour and a half before classes started at 8 in the morning, he had gotten up early enough to run, eat breakfast, take a shower, and get ready. Izuku approached the station at a leisurely pace while keeping his eyes closed. Those who noticed this gave him looks of curiosity and amusement. Most likely, they were wondering if the tall teenager wanted to run into something. Of course, none of them were aware of the mantra side of his quirk, which allowed him to perceive a range of 60 feet, more than enough to avoid bumping into someone or anything and to ensure he didn't get lost on the way to his destination, even though it was only reduced to 60% of its passive capabilities due to his covering his ears, eyes, and nose while listening to music. When Izuku finally arrived at the station, he grinned as he descended the stairs and saw a familiar figure enter his field of passivity. As usual, on time, he thought fondly as he made his way to the train's boarding platform, which would take him to the station closest to the United Arab Emirates. Upon his arrival, he was greeted with a broad smile upon seeing Momo leaning back against a pillar, her surprisingly feminine school suitcase held in front of her with both hands. She looks nice in her assigned role. That's not surprising though, he thought as soon as he took in her appearance, blushing shamefully at his own thought. Oh no. Get your mind straight, Midoriya. For heaven's sake, it's not even 7 in the morning, remain in control. Izuku tried for a few seconds to hide his blush, and for the most part succeeded. Then, he smiled and waved his hand. Momo-chan, good morning. At the sound of his voice, Momo automatically smiled and turned to face him, blushing slightly as she took in his appearance. She was ashamed to admit that, despite her distaste, his uniform concealed the tone of his muscles. It still fit him perfectly and fit him correctly, so his entire muscular mass was still visible, which made her happy. Momo likes very much, she thought to herself, but she didn't let it show on her face, as all girls do. Instead, flashing a lovely smile and waving back. Good morning to you too, Izuku-kun. When he got close to her, he asked, did you wait here for long? Momo gave a headshake. Knowing full well that Izuku had been a literal ball of excitement for the past few days due to the impending start of their first year at UA, she teased him, saying, not really. I've been for about 5 minutes or so. I am, however, surprised that you didn't beat me here. Did you even sleep at all? Knowing exactly what she was talking about, Izuku blushed a little and found himself not wanting to look at her, knowing that the amused expression she was sure to have on her face would only make him look even more foolish. His lips quirked in mock indignation as he said, I refuse to deign such a claim with a comeback. Momo merely laughed and shook her head. In a few moments, Izuku joined her. After settling down, Izuku and Momo started having serious conversations about UA and things like what they anticipated learning. Naturally, they engaged in that activity quite frequently as they anticipated this day, but they had an unwritten understanding not to go overboard in order to avoid becoming so enthused that their only useful action was to think about it. Izuku and Momo were free of their restraints today, and they were chatting away happily. They didn't even notice when their train was about to arrive. They boarded and settled in almost without thinking. Thankfully, they were aware when the train was ready to disembark at their station, and they did so after an awkward moment of turning away from one another before laughing about it. They walked calmly toward the UA because they were not in a hurry. Facilities as they carried on with their conversation, focusing less on it this time to avoid becoming as sidetracked as they had a few minutes earlier. Once they arrived at the facilities, they were astounded by what they saw, even after they had seen the impressive gate and fence as well as the 4 buildings that served as the school's main buildings. Momo said inanely, "At least we aren't the only ones," glancing around at other students who appeared to be their age and who were likewise gawking up at everything with awe and shock as they entered the school. As they entered, older students gave them a knowing look and some even laughed aloud. As they walked past the doors, Izuku said, "That would have been a bit embarrassing," yes, sighing slightly in relief. They had been informed that the doors would close and they would not be allowed entry if they did not have their student IDs. He had placed his inside his backpack, in one of those tiny, inconvenient to think of pockets. He had taken that action to ensure that he would always have it with him when he went to school. He was still bracing himself for the doors to close on him despite knowing that people were prone to that when nerves and excitement collided. He asked her as they entered the building that was in front and to the left, "Do you know where our classroom is?" They concluded that their classroom was in Building 1" because that was the name of the building and because other students in their age group were also entering it. Momo said, "Last floor," after giving it some thought. Each building has 15 floors and each department has a number of floors dedicated to it depending of their needs. For example, the Department of Support has 3 floors dedicated to it, due to the number of tools and equipment they need for their courses. We of the course of Heroics only have the last and second to last floors dedicated to us since we only use them for theoretical classes and the rest of the time is spent on the school training grounds learning how to use our quirks effectively in preparation for the time we become heroes. Izuku nodded understandingly as they entered the elevator, which was oddly only occupied by them at the time. He groaned and said, "That makes sense," flashing a brief smile on his face. He muttered, but Momo could still hear him, It was a given he was going to pass I guess, but why did he have to be in the same class as me?" She inclined her head inquisitively. "Who?" The elevator halted and its door opened, and Izuku scowled. "A guy from my middle school. We used to be friends, at least from my perspective." Then his quirk manifested and long story short he turned into a very unpleasant persona so much that for a moment I thought he was going to become a villain, which would have been very, very bad since his quirk is one of the most powerful I have seen. Say what you want about Katsuki Bakugo, but his peculiar trait was terrifyingly powerful. Thankfully, he's got his sight on becoming the best hero there is, so I doubt that's going to happen. He's very stubborn. Dealing with him can get very annoying, very quickly. Momo hummed in comprehension, and she said, I get it. She herself had to deal with people who believed that their strong quirks gave them the right to everything. Unless you proved to them that your own quirk was, in their opinion, weaker than theirs, they would harass you for as long as you had to deal with them on a regular basis. Let's just try our best to ignore him if he gets out of hand, yes. Besides, I doubt the teachers will allow that kind of behavior in a school as prestigious as this one is. Izuku gave a nod. I hope so. Eventually, they arrived at their classroom door, which was more than 3 times as tall as Izuku. It was painted in a vertical pattern with the letters 1A, with a small window visible through the hole to the inside of the classroom. He could sense that Katsuki was involved in the disturbance even though he was unable to hear what was happening inside it possibly because the room was sound isolated. Izuku's expression fell so far flat it was almost lifeless as he opened the door. Momo looked in over his shoulder, curious. Don't put your legs on the desk. Don't think that's disrespectful towards your classmates. No, as a matter of fact, I don't think so. Which middle school are you from anyway? You good-for-nothing fodder? The first person to speak, the nearly robotic man who brought up the concern about the 4 villains on the handout they received the day of the entrance exam, received a prompt response. A private SCH ahem. I'm from Somei Junior High School. My name is Tenya Iida. Somei. Huh? Katsuki exclaimed, leaning forward and grinning with a cruel expression on his face. Well, aren't you a fucking elite? Seems I've got a reason to fucking kill you until you die after all. A justification for, kill me until I die, how absurd. Tenya flinched back, his face showing horror as he turned to face with Katsuki. What nerve! You want to be a hero? Momo watched the brief exchange and shook her head in disbelief, her expression now as flat as Izuku's. She remarked, I can see what you meant earlier, recalling people who thought their peculiarities made them superior to others. After their brief conversation, she gained insight into Katsuki's character and realized that, if he wasn't corrected, he would be far worse than the people she had to deal with in the past. Izuku simply sighed wearily. When Tenya noticed that the door was open out of the corner of his eye, he moved robotically in his direction. Hello. My name is Tenya Iida from Some. Yes, I heard you from when you were interacting with Bakugo. Izuku grinned and held out his hand to him. Shaking his hand, he thought, he's still as stiff and uptight as he was during the entrance examination. My name is Izuku Midoriya. I believe we met each other briefly before the practical test, yes? Izuku asked. Now that he was focusing a little more, he saw that the child with a thick, muscular tail and the attractive boy with blonde hair were also present. The boy had been wearing a jeweled belt. Tenya gave a nod. He admitted, a little dryly, that he had remembered the first 20 seconds of the exams and then when he had destroyed the trap villain with a single punch after moving as fast as he had seen his brother move when going all out. Yes, we did. You were pretty much unassuming and the only thing of note back then was the fact that you didn't arrive with your school uniform and your impressive physique, but rest assured that you made quite the impression afterwards, he said. That's when he saw Momo move to the side from behind Izuku and give her a slight bow at the waist. Hello there. My name is Tenya Iida. I'm from. Momo laughed and her lips quirked. She extended her hand and said, I also overheard you, Iida-kun. My name is Momo Yaoyorozu. Nice to meet you. Unintentionally thinking the same thing as Izuku because of how stiffly he moved. She questioned whether he moved similarly when he used his quirk or engaged in other forms of combat. She really hoped not, because if he did, he would never prevail in combat. He said to her, likewise, and then turned to face Izuku with a serious expression. I have to hand it to you, Midoriya. You figured out the truth behind the practical exam, didn't you? It was the reason why you went and destroyed the trap villain without hesitation to save that girl, right? He responded, known for a fact that UA was unwilling to let go of someone possessing such a strong quirk as Izuku's. I was completely blind to it until after the fact. I hate to admit it, but you were the better out of the two of us. Izuku blinked, then gave a headshake. Not really. I didn't find out about it until the next day when Momo-chan had to almost walk me through the explanation why the trap villain wasn't what it seemed. I just saw that Ochako-chan about to get hurt and someone's safety is more important than being accepted to this school. Still, I'm glad it turned out to be a scam, he laughed. When the other students in the classroom heard this, they all turned to face Izuku with wide eyes, with the exception of Momo, who was already aware of what had happened, and the two blonde boys who were pretty and had a tail. However, Momo was the only one who didn't question what kind of quirk he had or how strong it had to be to let him destroy something that large and strong. After all, they had all seen the trap villain. In addition, he appeared to have intervened to prevent someone from being killed by the terrifying fourth villain, ignoring the points he had already accrued, which were probably not insignificant given that his quirk was apparently strong enough to eliminate the trap villain in question. With a few notable exceptions, everyone there was eager to get to know the curly-haired teen more. Katsuki's shocked expression gave way to one of rage and hatred as he snarled and glared at Izuku. Smoke slowly rising from his palm. That fucking nerd. Remembering the only conversation they'd had between the examination entrance and now, he thought to himself. To organize their documentation for their transfer to the United States, they had traveled to Oradera. And after the teacher had commended them for passing the test as well as placing first and second, he had confronted him. When he discovered that Izuku had won first place, he was furious and didn't even wait to confront him until he knew how much of a difference their scores were. After a few disparaging remarks, profanity, and threats, Izuku shot him down with a glare that made him, for some reason, back off. Not only that, but it was because of him that he had shivered in terror the second time. Subsequently, Katsuki had at last conceded that Izuku possessed a peculiarity, albeit a powerful one. However, there was a significant divide between acknowledging that Izuku's quirk outweighed his. That was just not acceptable. Deku, I'm going to fucking kill you the first chance I get. Once he was back with Izuku, He was idly chatting with Momo and Tenya. Tenya, despite his stiffness, was somewhat surprised to find that he was pleasant to talk to. Suddenly, he became alert and turned to face Momo with a knowing smile. Momo gave him a confused frown in return, but then she realized what was going on and her own expression changed to one of alertness. Tenya, who was about to speak, appeared perplexed. A short while later, the classroom door opened and Ochako emerged, practically frolicking into the space with a beaming smile on her face. However, she froze in midair upon seeing Izuku. She initially just blushed as she glanced at him, but then she grinned and sprinted over to the teen with green hair. She exclaimed, "Deku-kun," with delight and then glomped him, encircling his middle with her arms. After realizing how attractive she was in her uniform and sensing her body against his as she gave him a hug, Izuku blushed. He then shook his head, regained his composure, laughed, and gave Momo a smug look while giving Ochako a hug in return. "It's good to see you again, Ochako-chan." Momo rolled her eyes, moved forward, and gave a beaming Ochako a quick tap on the shoulder to gain her attention. She trailed off, smiling tenderly at Ochako as she stepped back from Izuku's embrace. "Hello. My name is Momo Yaoyorozu. I am good friend of Izuku. He spoke a lot about you and," she said, blushing as she realized what she had done and turning redder when she saw the expression on Momo's face. "He told me what you tried to do after the exams were finished and thought you costed him his chance to get in. You don't know how much that meant to him." As Momo moved in to give her a hug, Ochako's whole face flushed red, and when she turned to face Izuku, she only managed to avert her eyes and blush due to his gentle expression. Ochako calmed down after a moment and eagerly gave Momo another hug. With a slightly regretful voice, she said, "It's nice to meet you too, Yaoyorozu-san. And what I did for the Deku-kun, I only did it because it was the right thing to do after he lost his points because of me." Momo exclaimed, "Nonsense," as she pulled away from Ochako and held him by the shoulders. With confidence, Momo smiled at the girl with brown hair and said, "It was not your fault, Ochako-chan. So stop blaming yourself for something that didn't happen. In fact, the opposite happened. You helped Izuku-kun get more points." Izuku chewed, shut his mouth, held his chin, considered it, and then shrugged and nodded. "She is not without merit." "Yes," Iida nodded rigidly. Ochako became aware of this, and her eyes grew wide. "That's right." Suddenly, with a playful twinkle in her eyes, she turned to face Izuku and said, "So, you owe me, Deku-kun." Izuku gave her a playful sidelong glance. "Is that accurate? Then what do you do?" Izuku trailed off as he stared angrily at the door. "How in the hell did I miss someone entering my range? Not even All Might can accomplish that. Who the hell is this?" He thought to himself as a presence suddenly appeared 75 feet within his passive range of mantra perception. Momo, Ochako, and Iida gazed at him bewildered, but it seemed as though Momo had some idea of what might have occurred because she was aware of Haki's potential. At that moment, the classroom door opened, revealing a man with black hair, half-lidded eyes, and a yellow sleeping bag encased in it. "If you are going to be hunting for buddies, do it elsewhere," he said in a bored voice, removing a juice pouch. "This is the department," he said, epically sucking the pouch in one go, "of heroics." He went to sit down, and Izuku stared at him. There was something familiar about the unwashed man, but he couldn't quite put his finger on it. Who the hell is this guy? He thought to himself, and he looked at Momo and Ochako, who both shrugged helplessly and shook their heads, not knowing who this person was. The man shrugged off the sleeping bag to reveal his black long-sleeved shirt, utility belt, and black pants tucked into his boots. He also had an odd scarf wrapped around his neck several times, covering part of his upper chest and lower face. He stood slightly slouched in front of each, appearing to be about ready to go to sleep, which made Izuku feel more familiar with him even though he was still unidentified. "You guys took 8 seconds to calm down, huh? Kids, life is too short. All of you lack common sense." "Huh?" Izuku asked, arching an eyebrow. The classroom's general reaction to his remarks was one of irritated incredulity combined with that. "Aizawa Shota, I'm your homeroom teacher. Pleasure meeting you," he said, his tone and expression not matching his words at all, with only furthered to annoy and weird out the students. He then reached into his sleeping bag and pulled out blue and white tracksuit. The reason why he would have such a thing inside a sleeping bag would remain unanswered indefinitely. Wear these. Right away. After that, head over to the PE grounds. Huh? As All Might sat in his new office going through the files of the students in Class 1A, the class to which Izuku had been assigned and the one in which he would be teaching Foundational Heroes Studieza, he became excited when he recalled a small detail about the first day of classes at UA. After a few moments, Toshinori sighed as he put down the documents and pinched the bridge of his nose. I totally forgot how unforgiving UA's system is. Depending on their homeroom teacher, they might be expelled before the day is even over. Who is their homeroom teacher anyways? He thought to himself before checking the first pages of his documents. Aizawa was obtained by them. He paused for a second, then scowled. I hope he doesn't force young Midoriya-kun to use his current 100%. They're in for a very rude awakening. A test for quirk assessment? Izuku asked inquisitively as he stretched out slowly. He, Momo, Ochako, Tenya, the rest of the class, and Aizawa were at the enormous PE grounds, which had a variety of areas for practicing various sports. However, what about the ceremony of initiation? Or the meeting with the guidance counselor? Lowly inquired Ochako, blushing slightly as she cast several surreptitious looks at Izuku, who continued to stretch as if there were no problems at all. She knew that Izuku had the best physique of all the boys there, so she couldn't blame the hormonal teenage girls for being interested. But if they reacted this way to him in the tracksuit, she wondered how they would react when they saw him in his hero costume. To her amusement and slight annoyance, she noticed that all the girls were sending discreet glances his way with a tint of pink on their cheeks. She laughed merrily at the thought. Aizawa spoke somewhat angrily, if you want to be heroes, we don't have time for such frivolities, before turning to face them all over his shoulder and staring at them with half-lidded, bloodshot eyes that seemed menacing. Has a reputation for allowing a great deal of freedom on campus. He said, well, that freedom also goes for us teachers, too, in a tone that was sure to chill everyone to the bone. Pitch a softball. Long jump while standing. A 50-meter sprint. Running for endurance. Strength of grip. Persistent sideways leap. Upper body exercise. Toe touch while seated. Naturally, you are familiar with all of these from middle school. Physical examination during which it was forbidden to use your peculiarities. The nation still hasn't managed to standardize those kinds of records or monitor average performance levels. The Ministry of Education, Culture, Sports, Science, and Technology has that as one of its shortcomings. After pausing to make sure everyone was paying attention, Aizawa took out a tablet connected to the school system and said, Midoriya. In middle school, how far could you really throw a soft ball? Izuku shrugged and said, 96 meters. Try using your quirk this time around, Aizawa said, nodding and motioning for Izuku to move inside the throwing circle. After Izuku obeyed, Aizawa lobbed the ball at him. Anything you do is acceptable as long as you stay inside the circle. Don't hold back, he concluded in a somewhat acerbic manner. Izuku turned to face him, hoping that Aizawa had understood his question correctly. Are you sure you don't want me to hold back? Aizawa appeared to have responded positively, nodding his head. Izuku sighed and nodded his head in acceptance. It appeared that his homeroom teacher had witnessed him defeat the trap villain, implying that he couldn't get away with using armament hockey to the fullest extent possible. Only an idiot would think that he could do what he did with that much power. There was no way Aizawa could have known that it was one for all, so he could have easily passed it off as a quirk that increased his physical enhancement level, which wasn't exactly a lie, but it wasn't the whole truth either. Izuku muttered, here I go then, as the shiny blackness of the armament completely covered his right arm, though the sleeve of his tracksuit obscured the other half of his bicep from view. I think the black item on his arm is really cool. What is that? A red-haired boy with spikes made a comment while he studied Izuku closely. It is the armament side of Izuku-kun's eccentricity. Momo looked at the young man and said, by controlling a unique energy in his body, he can increase his strength, speed, and durability many times over depending on the amount of energy he uses. She smiled a little. Aspect. You mentioned it. Does that imply that he has multiple uses for his quirk? A short girl with green hair and somewhat frog-like facial features was being questioned. Despite this, she managed to maintain her cuteness as she held one of her slightly oversized fingers against her cheek. Momo gave a nod. All right. As long as he is focused, Izuku-kun can use this energy to sense almost everything around him. He can also project it outward to terrify his enemies. Haki, ambition, his quirk, is incredibly potent. With her arms crossed beneath her well-proportioned bust, she acknowledged, easily one of the strongest I have personally seen. At this, Katsuki's eyebrow quirked and he appeared prepared to lose his cool. Then, to everyone's further surprise, since they had assumed Izuku was going to throw the ball, red veins of energy started to run through his arm, and his otherwise black arm started to take on a silvery hue. Not only that, but Aizawa detected a faint smell of burn ozone and saw greenish-blue arcs of lightning follow down his arm. At last, Izuku threw the softball at that moment. A shockwave caused the air to be disrupted, kicking up a great deal of dust, which caused everyone to shield their eyes with their arms. After a short while, everything calmed down, and they all turned to face Izuku. The ground was slightly cracked around him, and he was standing motionless inside the circle while holding up his smoking arm. This time, Ochako noticed without much thought that it wasn't shaking. Izuku started saying, "Aizawa-sensei," while clenching his fist. His tablet beeped at that point, and Aizawa looked down to see the outcome. His gaze grew wide. 2043.8 weight units. He turned to face Midoriya, and when he saw the fierce look on Izuku's face, a grin of excitement and eagerness spontaneously emerged. "If you still want for UA to have usable PE grounds by the time we finish, I suggest you allow me to hold back a little, yes?" "This kid," Aizawa muttered. Toshinori became alert upon hearing the muffled boom of sound emanating from outside. With a sigh, he started angrily rubbing his eyebrows with his thumb, index finger, and middle finger. "I'll make they take the damage out of your pay, Aizawa." A pretty girl with pink skin and hair exclaimed, "Awesome. That looks so fun," with a big smile on her pretty face. She also had a small horn sticking out of her head. She looked at Izuku, her black and yellow eyes glistening with wonder. The same red-haired boy looked at Izuku with wide eyes and muttered, 2044 meters. What in the actual fuck? With disbelief. And he doesn't even appear worn out. Was he really the one who outwitted the swindler at the security check? Ochako wasn't overly shocked since she had already witnessed Izuku's strength up close from the front row. Therefore, she didn't find it shocking when she saw him toss a ball more than 2 kilometers away. The UAPE grounds had plenty of space to accommodate the softball throw field, plus more. Rather, Ochako blushed with embarrassment and concentrated more on how awesome he looked at that moment. Yes. The girl was having a hard time. Momo, though, was taken aback. "I had no idea he could strengthen himself to that extent." She stared at him as he locked eyes with their teacher, unwilling to back down, but he never really went into details. Her cheeks began to slightly flush without her knowing. A boy with short hair, one side red and the other white, thought, Midoriya Izuku. His upper left face was scarred by a burn, with one eye on that side of the scar being turquoise and the other gray. His eyes narrowed as he fixed a hard stare on Izuku, his left fist tightening. "I'll be watching him closely." Katsuki, meanwhile, could only look in shock. What the heck? Katsuki had known his quirk was strong ever since Izuku had saved him, but he had not anticipated this. He could tell that all of it was Izuku's strength even though the vein-like thingies and electricity was known because he didn't remember any of that when he saw Izuku use his quirk for the first and last time before today. He gritted his teeth and clenched his slowly smoking fists, frowning. That bastard. He refrained then, and now he wants to refrain. Is he making fun of me? I'm going to fuck him off? Aizawa nodded subtly, quickly figuring from Izuku's display that if he went all out, he could easily destroy the grounds. After that, he schooled his features into an intimidating expression and turned his attention away from Izuku. With his half-lidded bloodshot eyes adding to the image, he turned to glare at each of them, whispering menacingly, "It looks fun. You say? So, you were planning to spend 3 years here having a good old time? What happened to becoming heroes?" Aizawa's voice caused many to shudder in fear as he fixed everyone with his gaze. Only a select few, including Katsuki, Iida, Momo, the boy with 2 hair, the girl with frog-like features, and even Ochako, were able to maintain his stare without trembling or flinching. "All right then. Since that's how it is, I've got a new rule. The student who ranks last in total points will be judged as hopeless, and will be instantly expelled." Izuku, recalling the events that transpired with him during the entrance examination, raised an eyebrow at him after returning to stand beside the group. Is he even capable of that? He turned to face Momo, clearly expressing his request through his expression. He nodded at her, and she smiled back almost immediately when she rolled her eyes and shook her head in the negative. Izuku reddened slightly and shook his head to clear his mind of the intrusive ideas about how attractive Momo was. Okay. He turned to face his classmates, sweating as he noticed the horrified, determined, unsure, and depressing expressions on the majority of their faces. Let's just hope nobody noticed. Never mind. Aizawa looked at them all, her menacing expression turning to one of sadistic glee. We dispense as students as we please. Welcome to our freedom, he said, smiling and pushing back a little of his hair so his students could see his almost mocking expression. To the Department of Heroics. A very short boy with a big head and grape-like hair exclaimed, his pale skin perspiring throughout his body as he bit his nails quickly. The one who ranks last gets expelled. With a hint of protest in her voice, Ochako exclaimed, this is our first day here, but even if it weren't, that's just too unreasonable. Aizawa gave her an eyebrow lift. His gaze hardened, and when he saw that she understood, he turned to address everyone. Natural disasters, massive accidents, ego mad villains, all kind of calamities can happen when we least expect them. Japan is now positively up to the neck in unreasonable, and it's our jobs as heroes to reserve it all and restore reason. He stopped menacingly and pointed a finger up at the sky, saying, if you were counting on a friendly chat at the local McDonald's after school, that's too bad. From now on, for the next 3 years, all you can expect from your life at UA is one hardship after the next. This is, plus ultra, I expect you to overcome these trails and climb to the top. Everyone, with the exception of the short boy with grape-colored hair, appeared determined as they nodded their heads to their teacher, seemingly inspired by Aizawa's unexpected words of encouragement. Iida clenched the water bottle he was holding and narrowed his eyes. The pressure is on. So this is the ultimate hero training at UA's baptism, huh? I have no choice but to give it everything I've got. It doesn't matter how strong your quirk is, Deku. I'll show you that I am the best between us. Katsuki glared at Izuku, a dangerous smile on his face as he grabbed his shoulder and started spinning his arm in a warm-up exercise. Ochako made that sound with her mouth while keeping her determined expression and clenching her fists. Seeing everyone excited about the impending trails, Aizawa grinned and said, that was the demonstration, then. Is it time to step it up a level? The tests then started. The 50-meter dash was the first test, and Iida showed that he was in his element by using his quirk, Engine, which did exactly what it sounded like. It gave him engines for legs that were at calf level. He finished the dash in 3.04 seconds. Asui Suyu, on the other hand, showed that even though her quirk wasn't particularly fast, it did give her some advantages when used correctly. She finished the dash in 5.58 seconds. Using her quirk, Zero Gravity, to make her clothes and shows weightless, Ochako finished in 7.15 seconds, which was less than what a normal human with physical training could accomplish as her speed wasn't enhanced. Yuga Aoyama, the pretty blonde boy, used his quirk, Naval Laser, to propel himself backwards in direction of the finishing line, finishing in 5.51 seconds despite falling to the ground when he reached his limit of continuing to fire the laser from his navel. Mina Ishido, the pink-skinned girl with black and yellow eyes and horns, finished in 5.26 seconds, demonstrating that her physical attributes were comparable to Suyu's despite her quirk being acid. Momo demonstrated her exceptional physical conditioning when she completed the race dash in 6.24 seconds, utilizing only her unique ability to design sneakers with unique spikes on the sole for improved ground contact. When it came time for Katsuki and Izuku to make their dash, which happened to be against each other, the user of the quirk, Explosion, used the name of his quirk to push himself forward while Izuku used Armament to enhance every muscle in his body that engaged in the action of running at its current maximum output without enhancing it with One for All. Izuku won the race, finishing in 2.91 seconds, faster than Tenya and Bakugo, much to Tenya's ire, finished in 3.93 seconds. Next came the grip strength test, where only 3 people achieved extreme results. Mezzo Shoji, Dupli Arms quirk, Rikido Sato, Sugar Rush quirk, and Izuku, Armament enhancement. Sato scored 312 kilograms after consuming a small amount of sugar. Shoji scored 540 kilograms, and Izuku scored 631 kilograms. Then came the standing long jump, where Tsuyu, Aoyama, and Tsuyu were the winners. Following that was the sustained sideways jump, where Mineta, the child who was as short as a grapefruit, was the winner due to his pop-off quirk. They then returned to the softball pitch trail, where Izuku was amused to see that Ochako's result was infinite, when she used her quirk to negate the effects of gravity on the ball before she threw it, and he was impressed, though not surprised, to see Momo build a small cannon for the softball, which was within the rules as she could, as Aizawa put it, do whatever she wanted as long as she didn't leave the circle. Her softball nearly reached a kilometer, and he didn't have to throw another softball because Aizawa chose to use his first throw as his result in that trail. All of the trails kept going after that until they were completed. "It's time to present the results," Aizawa said, standing in front of the students, all of whom were exhausted in varying degrees. Izuku, for example, wasn't even perspiring, which shocked the few people who were observant enough to notice that he had been pulling off truly terrifying feats one after another. "The total is the simply aggregate sum of each of your scores," Aizawa said. "I'll reveal all of your scores at once because it would take longer if I recited them all." Aizawa raised his hand, pointing a remote control at a screen, and everyone tensed, waiting to see who would be kicked out first. Then Aizawa spoke once more, looking bored. "Oh, yeah. That entire matter of expulsion. By the way, it was a lie." The silence that followed, with the exception of Momo and Izuku, was so intense that you could hear a pin drop. Everyone was staring at Aizawa in shock and confusion. "Huh?" All of their mouths dropped open, and Ochako's eyes widened comically as her fists hung lifelessly in front of her. Aizawa gave them a menacing look while smiling with amusement. "It was a sensible ploy to bring out your best performances," he said. "Humans are known to function at their peak when they believe that something worthwhile is ultimately at risk." Izuku giggled as Momo rolled her eyes at the other people's subsequent furious outburst, who all appeared prepared to kill the jubilant Aizawa. "Come on guys. Think rationally and apply your intellect." She shook her head and told them, of course it was a lie, sounding a little frustrated. Then Aizawa pivoted and started heading back towards the main building, and, "Right. Yes. And that concludes it. Give your curriculum sheets a once-over now that they're back in the classroom. Don't overly unwind either," he said. "If you think today was ridiculous and unreasonable, your eyes will definitely fall out of your sockets at tomorrow's ordeal." Then, with a casual flick of the remote, the screen came to life, displaying each player's position and score. 1. Midoriya Izuku 2. Yaoyorozu Momo 3. Todoroki Shoto 4. Katsuki Bakugo 5. Tenya Iida 6. Fumikage Tokiyami 7. Mezzo Shoji 8. Mashirao Ojiro 9. Eijiro Kirishima 10. Mine Ishido 11. Ochako Uraraka 12. Koji Koda 13. Sato Rikido 14. Asui Tsuyu 15. Yuga Aoyama 16. Honta Siro 17. Kami Kaminari 18. Jiro Kyoka 19. Hagakure Toru 20. Minoru Mineta. The fact that Izuku had won first place was not shocking to anyone present. However, the very large difference between his score and Momo's, who came in second, was unexpected. Mineta, who had fainted upon realizing he had finished last and was ecstatic that he would not be banished, and two other people were the only ones congratulating him. "And who the fuck is this guy? Shoto Todoroki. He looks familiar for some reason, but I can't place where I've seen him before. How the fuck did he get third place anyway?" Katsuki said, glaring daggers at both him and Momo. "Fourth fucking place? I can understand Deku getting first place because of that ridiculous quirk of his." He turned to face the bi-haired boy who was standing next to him and continued to stare at Izuku. Shoto, in the meantime, narrowed his eyes and widened them again when he felt his left side start to heat up while his right side started to get cold. Scowling, he crossed his arms and concentrated on controlling his quirks, managing to do so after a few moments. Shoto then turned his eyes back to Izuku, who was laughing embarrassedly at Ochako's reenactment of his feats, narrating in an exaggerated voice while the others laughed in amusement. Gradually, a grin of excitement appeared on Shoto's face as he narrowed his eyes at Izuku. "Midoriya. How interesting. You lie, Aizawa." That was the incredible welcome he received when he turned the corner and saw the current greatest hero up close. "Oh, it's you, All Might," Aizawa said with a bored expression. Did you happen to watch? I take it that you have to be at liberty? He was disregarded by All Might. A rational trick? I didn't realize you were funny with pranks. Yes, last year you did expel a whole class of first graders. If you believe that a child has 0 chances, you immediately throw them out. This is a far cry from what you used to say all the time. Mighty's smile grew even more epic as he leaned a beat in Aizawa's direction and gestured at him with his hand like a gun. Maybe it's because that you felt it, too. How raw is young Midoriya's potential? You experienced it too? Huh? Aizawa questioned rhetorically, making All Might realize his folly as he began to mentally sweat. Aizawa turned towards him with an uncaring expression on his face. So, you know him, then? I was aware that, for some reason, he made me think of you. It seems that your love of extravagant performances had an impact on him. Thank you. Grinned All Might. He laughed, that wasn't a compliment, and then sighed and shrugged. I'm going to go ahead and say that you helped train him, he said. You and he are too similar for that not to be true. It should therefore be clear at this point that he already possesses the physical attributes necessary to become a pro-hero, but his advanced age, in addition to his inexperience and immaturity, prevent that from happening. Everyone in that class has chances above 0 aside from that. Anytime someone's chances fall below that threshold, I have the right to remove them. Ending a half-hearted pursuit of a dream is not inherently cruel, is it? Just as I thought. You and I will never get along. He put a fist on his waist and wiggled a finger in Aizawa's direction. As analytical and logical as ever, And your brand of kindness, he thought, mentally nervous at how close Aizawa had gotten to the actual truth. He was going to have to talk with Izuku about this. They needed to be more careful, just in case. Aizawa simply shrugged and kept walking away, hands in his pockets and a slouched gait. When all was said and done, Izuku was leaving the UA grounds with Momo, Ochako, Tenya, and they were all going to the same train station, so it made sense that they would travel there together. I must admit, Aizawa-sensei truly understood me. In fact, I had thought, this is what the highest academic level for a hero looks like. Tenya nodded repeatedly, holding his chin with his thumb and index finger as he said, now I see how a teacher can encourage deception. Izuku laughed and said, I thought he was stiff, but he's just diligent and honest. Izuku shook his head and said, I took the entrance examination and learned my lesson. Until demonstrated otherwise, anything that heroes directly relate to UA is untrue unless demonstrated differently. Ochako agreed by nodding her head. I concur. The first day of class barely ended, and they have already duped us twice. With a contemplative nod, Momo continued, so, do we take Aizawa-sensei's warning that tomorrow's trails will be even more challenging than today's seriously and prepare for every scenario that comes to mind, or do we just wait and see? Izuku shook his head, saying, by that reasoning, tomorrow ought to be an entirely ordinary day. However, All Might is our teacher for Foundational Heroes Studies, which is tomorrow. I have had direct interactions with him on a few occasions in the past, and I can tell you with certainty that nothing about him is normal. With wide eyes, Tenya paused and turned to face Izuku. You have dealt with All Might more than once. How did that come about? Momo and Ochako were not shocked. They already knew that All Might had trained Izuku. What they were unaware of, though, was the true nature and scope of that training. He and All Might had surmised that if people believed that All Might had trained Izuku and weren't scared to admit it, then they wouldn't be too suspicious because it wouldn't appear as though they were concealing something. You recall that incident between him and the sludge villain about 10 months ago? Izuku asked, scratching the back of his head. He eventually saw how I used the armament part of my quirk to save Bakugo from it, and he claimed that it was similar to his own quirka, which he declined to further explain, incidentally. Said he wanted to keep the bastard who was secretive and the people guessing. Nevertheless, he gave me some advice on how to control and train it and wanted to make sure I knew what I was doing. Tenya saluted him directly, expressing how much he was impressed. Midoriya, you have unbelievable luck. You are impressed by my luck. What the heck, dude? Izuku exclaimed, perspiring. What do you think All Might is going to have us do, Deku-kun? Ochako asked, casting a questioning glance at Izuku. Well, if there's one thing I know, it's that All Might loves teaching through doing, so whatever the subject he is going to impart us with tomorrow is going to be practical, Izuku said. sighing as the others looked at him curiously and pinching the bridge of his nose. And if today is any indication, anything useful in this situation has to do with making some use of our peculiarities. Thus, I would anticipate something similar to what we have today, but with a touch of all might. So, damaging and probably dangerous? Momo asked, a playful smirk lighting up her face as she asked. Yep. In that case, I can't wait, Ochako exclaimed, throwing a few punches into the air as she nodded and grinned excitedly. She had a dangerous smile on her face and her body exuded a competitive aura. Momo and Izuku gave her a shocked look. With perspiration running down his temple, Tenya was more animated as he gaped at her, saying, Uraraka, what's wrong with you, please? Is that how you really are?
So that's it for today. I will continue this story in next part. Till then, bye bye.